In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. In an imperium devoured by endless conflict, where heroes rise only to be broken and consumed by unrelenting foes, few names endure. Even among the demigod-like astartes of the Adeptus Astartes, those warriors forged in the gene labs of the Emperor himself, true legends are rare. But among these few, one name is whispered with reverence. One name is spoken among chapter halls, inquisitorial vaults, and mechanicus databanks alike: Malum Caedo, a stern guard veteran of the Ultramarines' First Company, a brother whose saga echoes not only across Ultramar, but across the stars. His tale is not one of grand armies or sector-wide crusades, but of a single warrior cast into impossible circumstances and emerging as the hand of the Emperor's wrath. To understand the legend of Malum Caedo is to understand the finest essence of the Adeptus Astartes. He was no Primarch, no chapter master, nor even a captain. He was a line brother, an experienced warrior, yet one whose deeds would echo as though he had carried the weight of an entire chapter upon his shoulders. Malum Caedo was born of Ultramar, that bastion of civilization carved from the eastern reaches of the segmentum Ultima. He was raised as so many Ultramarines are, a youth selected for his potential, his discipline, and his unshakable will. Gene seed from the Primarch Robute Guilliman flowed within him, and through decades of training, hypno-indoctrination, and trial, Malum Caedo was remade into something more than human. He became Ultramarine. Unlike the countless neophytes who fell along the grueling path to ascension, Malum endured. He excelled. He survived the brutal tests within the fortress monastery of Macrage, mastered the Codex Astartes with near unparalleled clarity, and proved himself upon the battlefield many times over. As the years turned to centuries, his name was elevated from tactical marine to sergeant, and eventually to veteran of the First Company. But what truly set Malum apart was not only his tactical brilliance or his flawless adherence to the Codex. It was his indomitable resilience, his capacity to face overwhelming horror without faltering, and his capacity to act decisively and alone when the Emperor's will demanded it. The chronicles of the chapter record that before his most renowned campaign, Malum Caedo had already served in more than a dozen major conflicts, spanning from the Tyrannid invasions of Ultramar to the suppression of heretic uprisings along the borders of the Eastern Fringe. He had stood against the endless tides of the Orc Wars, the soulless legions of the Necron tomb worlds, and the perfidious Eldar raiders who strike like phantoms from the webway. Each of these wars forged Malum Caedo into a living weapon, a master of bolter and blade, of precision marksmanship and siegecraft. Among his peers, he was known for his unwavering calm under fire and his iron discipline, capable of executing the most complex tactical maneuvers without hesitation. Yet, for all his prior victories, it would be his deployment to the Forge world Graia that would immortalize his name. For decades after the world-breaking events of Graia's first great catastrophe, when orcs under warboss Grimskull clashed with the Ultramarines of Captain Titus, and Chaos attempted to harness forbidden warp technologies, Graia remained unstable. The world's forges, vital to the Mechanicus and the wider Imperium, never fully recovered from the scars of invasion. Even the vigilance of the Inquisition and the Adeptus Mechanicus could not fully purge the seeds of corruption that had taken root. Whispers reached the Ordo Malleus of renewed disturbances beneath Graia's Manufactoria, forbidden experiments conducted by rogue magi, tampering once more with the warp-tainted remains of the power source once created by the heretic Inquisitor Drogon. In their quest for knowledge and power, these tech priests reopened ancient wounds, and Chaos answered. When the call for aid was made, the Ultramarines did not hesitate. A select strike team of Stern Guard veterans was assigned to the operation, veterans deemed capable of operating under inquisitorial command and prepared to face the corruption of the warp itself. Among these chosen few stood Malum Caedo, but fate would twist the course of the mission before it even began. Aboard their strike cruiser bound for Graia, Inquisitor Cybele of the Ordo Malleus briefed the kill team on the extent of the unfolding catastrophe. The rogue tech priests had not only reignited the instability of Drogon's ancient warp core, but had triggered a growing rift into the immaterium itself. Cultists were rising from the depths of the Forge world, demon incursions had begun to manifest, and even elements of the dreaded Black Legion had been detected making planetfall, drawn to the scent of corruption like carrion beasts to a corpse. The mission parameters were clear: retrieve the remaining fragment of the warp core, close the rift if possible, and cleanse any heretical presence found within. The odds were grim. The enemy was entrenched, the warp growing stronger with every moment, and the environment itself twisting beneath the veil of unreality. Malum Caedo, clad in his ornate Mark VII Aquila armor, the blue ceramite of Ultramar freshly inscribed with purity seals and litanies of hatred, listened in silence as the Inquisitor concluded her briefing. In his gauntleted hands rested his bolter, meticulously maintained, blessed with the rites of sanctity, its vengeance rounds prepared to tear apart heretics, mutants, and demons alike. He had fought the enemies of mankind for centuries. He knew well that there was no margin for failure, not here, not again on Graia. For Malum Caedo, this mission was not merely another engagement. It was a continuation of a battle that had begun long ago, when his brothers Sidonus and Titus had spilled their blood to preserve Graia from ruin. He bore their memory with him now, and in his hearts burned the ancient oaths of vengeance sworn by every Ultramarine. To stand, to fight, to endure, to conquer. The drop pod descent would mark the beginning of a chapter that would echo across the Imperium, a tale of a lone Ultramarine who, when all others fell, stood unbowed against the abyss itself. The legend of Malum Caedo was about to be written in blood and fire. Graia, forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a world both sacred and accursed. From orbit, the planet shimmered beneath a veil of storm-racked clouds, its continents divided into sprawling manufactoria, crumbling hive districts, and towering spires crowned with flickering lumens. Endless rivers of industry carved burning scars across its surface. Magma refineries bled fire from the crust, while titanic foundries belched pillars of black smoke into the toxic atmosphere. A world whose heartbeat was the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the shriek of plasma furnaces, and the grinding of gears. But beneath its facade of industry, Graia pulsed with a sickness that no engine could purge. The memories of its first great war lingered like a specter. It was here that orcs once descended like a tidal wave under the brutish might of warboss Grimskull, seeking to plunder the forges of Mars' children and seize Graia's god machines. The orcs had come not only for battle, but for the prize that all warlords crave, the titans that slumbered within the Manufactoria vaults. Graia's defenders had been overwhelmed, its once proud Skitarii legions shattered beneath the green tide. Even the towering god machines of the Legio Titanicus stood at risk of falling to Xenos' hands. With the world trembling on the edge of annihilation, the call for salvation went forth, carried across the cold void to Ultramar. It was then that Captain Titus and his strike force of Ultramarines had answered. The story of Captain Titus became legend long before Malum Caedo set foot upon Graia. Titus and his brothers fought through impossible odds, crushing orc hordes, recovering control of the Titans, and ultimately halting an even darker foe hiding in the shadows. Chaos. It was on Graia that the sorcerer Nemeroth attempted to breach reality itself, manipulating an experimental warp core developed by the rogue Inquisitor Drogan, opening a gate into the Immaterium. Titus slew Nemeroth before his ascension could be completed, closing the warp breach and preserving the planet from being swallowed by the warp. The world had been saved, but not cleansed. Despite the victories etched in the annals of the Ultramarines, the cost of that campaign was steep. The corruption unleashed by Nemeroth's dark rites had stained Graia's very bones. The Mechanicus and the Inquisition swept in to impose order, but beneath their scrutiny, the world simmered with unspoken dread. Entire sectors were sealed under quarantine. Entire manufactoria districts were left abandoned, deemed too contaminated or unstable to restore. The warp-tainted power core was hidden away under lock and cipher, locked within a vault beneath the deepest layers of Graia's manufactoria sublevels. And still, something festered. As the decades passed, reports began to trickle upward. Quiet warnings dismissed at first, then cautiously recorded. Unexplained malfunctions, servitors corrupted beyond standard deviation, tech priests disappearing without record. Entire work crews lost in the lower forges, their deaths blamed on industrial accidents. But to those who watched with keen eyes, particularly the Ordo Malleus, the signs were unmistakable. The infection had never been fully burned out. Deep beneath Graia's steel skin, rogue elements of the Mechanicus, seduced by forbidden knowledge, had returned to the vault. In secret, these magi had resumed Drogan's heretical work, driven by the lure of understanding what had once threatened to unmake reality. They saw potential where others saw only danger, a chance to harness and weaponize the warp itself for the glory of the machine god. But the warp is no obedient beast. The moment the experiments resumed, the veil between worlds began to thin once more. It began with whispers, strange voices heard by adepts in isolated maintenance tunnels, unnatural fluctuations of gravity in the manufactoria's core, equipment functioning independently as though possessed by some unseen intelligence, unexplained power surges that triggered catastrophic failures in entire production sectors. Even the once sterile cogitation engines began to output impossible strings of data, filled with profaned logic symbols and corrupted cant. And then came the disappearances. Tech priests were consumed, their forms found days later, their flesh merging grotesquely with the very machinery they served. Flesh and steel warped into monstrous amalgamations. Many lower laborers who served the forges fled or simply vanished, their absence recorded without investigation. And still the heretics delved deeper into the warp core's mysteries, ignoring the mounting consequences. The thin membrane separating Graia from the Immaterium began to rupture. Small, localized warp breaches bled into reality. At first, minor, demonlings clawing their way through cracks in the world, vanishing before Inquisition kill teams could respond. But in time, the breaches widened. The rituals of the heretics, emboldened by initial success, grew more reckless. They sought to harness the core fragment directly, using it to amplify the warp field to experiment upon the very laws of reality. Their tampering called out to something darker, to forces far beyond their understanding. Chaos answered. Through the warp's endless tides came a force drawn by ancient resonance, a warband of the Black Legion, servants of the War Master Abaddon, guided by a sorcerer of great ambition. Tumulus Samael, lord of the warp's blessed corruption, had heard the call emanating from Graia's forbidden vaults. Where Nemeroth had failed, Samael would succeed. The Black Legion pierced Graia's weakened orbital defenses, striking with precision. Unlike the brute invasions of the orcs before them, the forces of chaos moved like a shadow spreading through the arteries of the Forge world. They struck at key locations, data vaults, mag rail hubs, energy conduits. Where they advanced, they gathered cultists from among the disillusioned, the desperate, and the already corrupted. Samael did not seek mere conquest, he sought ascension. With the rogue tech priests subjugated or willingly turned, Samael enacted a ritual designed to harness the warp core fragment and fully tear open Graia's skies. A new rift would blossom, a permanent wound in real space, through which untold legions of demons would pour. The Forge world would become a throne world of chaos, its forges converted into factories of unholy war machines, a foothold for the Black Legion deep within the Imperium's domain. The Inquisition saw the growing storm too late. Inquisitor Cybele, stationed within the sector, dispatched the initial warning signals to the Ultramarines. What few loyalist Mechanicus forces remained on Graia had been overwhelmed by chaos cults or destroyed in sabotage. The situation was dire. An entire Forge world stood on the precipice of annihilation, and worse, it threatened to become a permanent gateway for the gods of the warp. It was in this desperate hour that Malum Caedo was summoned. As a Stern Guard veteran of the First Company, his reputation for unbreakable resolve and lethal precision had already become legend within the chapter halls of Macraga. But this was not to be a standard deployment. This mission was sanctioned by the Ordo Malleus itself. Malum Caedo would not march with a great battle company or stand amid massed formations of Ultramar's finest. No, he was chosen for something far more precise. Graia demanded a blade, not a hammer. Inquisitor Cybele personally selected a handful of elite Ultramarines veterans. Stern Guard, masters of the most dangerous and delicate missions the chapter could assign. Warriors capable of facing not only heretics, but demons, sorcerers, and the unclean nightmares of the warp itself. Malum Caedo was among them. Their target, the vault beneath Graia's Manufactoria, where the warp core fragment pulsed with unnatural life. Their mission, to reclaim the artifact before the sorcerer Samael could complete his ritual, and to extinguish the fires of chaos before the warp consumed the world entire. This would not be a war of attrition. This would not be a siege. This would be a hunt. And Malum Caedo, silent and grim, prepared to descend into the shadows of Graia, a world poised once more to become a battlefield where reality itself could fracture, and where one Ultramarine might yet stand between mankind and damnation. The strike cruiser Glory of Macraga hung in high orbit above Graia like a silent executioner. Beneath it, the planet churned with dark energies, faint tendrils of warp light flickering from cracks in the atmosphere, barely visible to the naked eye. The rift had not yet fully blossomed, but its presence was undeniable, a wound pulsing with growing hunger. Inside the ship's arming chambers, the Ultramarines prepared for war. Unlike the massed formations of full companies that often thundered into planetary war zones, the strike team gathered here was small. Deliberately so. Every warrior present was a veteran of centuries, each bearing honors carved into their ceramite like holy inscriptions. They wore the colors of the First Company, Stern Guard veterans, chosen not for numbers but for precision. Malum Caedo stood among them. His armor was freshly anointed with sacred oils by the ship's tech marines, its deep cobalt blue offset by stark white trims along his shoulder guards and helm. Purity seals fluttered faintly as air circulators hummed around him. Each parchment bore litanies of strength, oaths of loyalty, and invocations of the Primarch Gilliman and the Emperor of Mankind. The chaplain's voice filled the chamber, reciting the ritual of redeployment. The words were ancient, known to every Ultramarine since the earliest days of the Great Crusade. We are the sons of Gilliman. His word is law, his will is our bond. The Codex is our guide, and the Emperor is our light. We go now not for glory, but for duty. The enemy is corruption. The price is blood. The reward is service. The veterans spoke as one, their voices like stone grinding against stone. "We shall not falter." Malum Caedo's gaze remained locked forward, focused not on the ceremony but on what awaited below. Every deployment was sacred, but this mission was different. This was no campaign of conquest or defense. This was exorcism. Graia, a world already stained by the touch of chaos once before, now demanded a deeper purging. The Inquisitor's briefing still echoed in his mind. The rogue tech priests, the warband of the Black Legion under Tumulus Samael, the growing warp anomaly feeding on the planet's core. And worse, the risk of a permanent warp gate forming, a violation of real space that could allow demonic legions to flood not just Graia, but the wider sector. Failure was unacceptable. There could be no retreat, no reinforcement. The enemy was entrenched in the Manufactoria's deepest vaults, warrens of machinery and steel, twisting downward toward the planet's heart. There was nowhere to fall back to, only forward. Malum performed his final checks, running his gloved hands across his bolter. It was a masterwork of ancient craftsmanship, its barrel engraved with ultramarine laurels and the aquila. The vengeance rounds loaded into its magazine were designed to annihilate the mutated flesh of demons and tear through the unholy armor of traitor Astartes. His chain sword hung at his side, its teeth newly sharpened, its ignition rune blessed by the ship's tech priests. The blessed weapon had served him well across countless worlds. It would serve again. One by one, the squad advanced toward the waiting drop pods, each sealing themselves inside their individual iron coffins. The interior lights dimmed as the hatches closed with heavy finality. Malum's pod trembled slightly as the grav couplers engaged, connecting to the cruiser's launch racks. A voice crackled over the internal vox, Inquisitor Cybele, cold and controlled as ever. Primary target is the artifact vault beneath Manufactorum District 7. Secondary objective is annihilation of all warp-corrupted entities. May the Emperor guide your aim. Malum closed his eyes briefly, not in hesitation but in silent focus. He offered no elaborate prayer. His faith was action, not words. The launch alarm sounded. Deployment in 5. His armor's gyroscopes adjusted automatically as the pod shifted into launch position. Beyond the reinforced hull, Graia waited, its surface cloaked in thunderheads, rivers of molten industry threading across its surface like burning veins. 3. Even through layers of steel, Malum could feel the distant pulse of the planet's warp corruption. A wrongness in reality itself, pressing faintly against his mind like fingers scratching behind his eyes. 2. He gripped his bolter tighter. 1. The pod fired. The descent was violent. The drop pod screamed through the upper atmosphere, its exterior glowing bright from atmospheric friction. Turbulence rattled the chamber as external flak batteries, now corrupted and under the control of heretic forces, spat bursts of anti-air fire skyward. Explosions bloomed around the falling pod, each detonation jarring his armor. Red warning sigils flared in his visor. The drop vector had shifted. A direct hit to the thruster array threw the pod into a spiraling tumble. The stabilizers fought to compensate, but the controls had been damaged. Malum's vox filled with static and brief bursts of distress signals from the other drop pods. Some were lost entirely, consumed by anti-air detonations or colliding with Manufactoria spires as they fell. He said nothing. There was no time to fear. The Emperor would judge all in the end. The pod impacted violently. The first sensation was silence, a heavy ringing vacuum of sound following the shuddering impact. Then came the groan of tortured metal as emergency clamps blasted open, forcing the pod's doors to detach in a burst of steam and smoke. Malum Caedo stepped into a wasteland. The Manufactoria sector was unrecognizable. Graia's once pristine assembly yards lay broken, twisted into chaotic shapes by the warping touch of the immaterium. Cranes jutted skyward like shattered bones, rail lines twisted into serpentine knots, their once logical geometries deformed as though the metal itself had rebelled against its former purpose. The air was thick with industrial smoke and a faint, almost sweet tang of ozone, signs of warp bleed. Red lightning arced through the ash-choked sky, illuminating shapes that shifted in the periphery of Malum's vision. He advanced. Bodies littered the ground around him. Not enemies, his own brothers. The remains of the other stern guard lay scattered across the impact zone, their armor rent and shattered by the violence of the crash or the creatures that had greeted them upon landing. Malum knelt briefly beside one of his fallen. The ceramite plate bore the mark of a mortal wound through the chest. A precision strike, not from an explosion but from combat. The enemy had reached them before they could even disembark. His internal auspex scanned the surroundings. Faint life signs flickered and vanished, but none registered as friendly. The rest of the squad was gone. He was alone. But Malum Caedo was not a man who required company to fulfill his purpose. The mission remained. The warp core fragment still pulsed somewhere deep within the Manufactoria's veins. And the enemy, the heretics, the cultists, the Black Legion, still defiled Graia with their presence. He lifted his bolter. The Emperor sees. The Emperor wills. I will not fail. The servo skull assigned to guide them through the underground sectors, miraculously still functional, hovered into view, its lenses flickering, its mechanical limbs twitching as it recalibrated its bearings. Though its master was dead, its mission remained. Malum followed, deeper into Graia's machine warrens, deeper into the dark, into the jaws of hell itself. Graia's underworld breathed like a living thing. Malum Caedo descended from the ruined Manufactoria yard into the substructures below. The arteries of a dead god, where ancient forges pulsed with lingering heat, and machine spirits whispered corrupted hymns in binary tongues. The servo skull floated ahead, its auspex relays whirring quietly as it navigated through the industrial gloom. Its dim lumen beam cast a narrow circle of pale light that barely pierced the choking haze. Pipes hissed and groaned in the walls, some still venting pressurized gas from half-functioning conduits. Steam bled into the corridors, creating a constant drifting fog that distorted shapes and swallowed sound. Malum advanced with disciplined caution. His footsteps echoed along iron walkways suspended over bottomless chasms. The weight of his ceramite boots sent vibrations through rusting grates, but he did not slow. The deeper he pushed into Graia's subterranean heart, the more twisted the structures became. No longer were these symmetrical Manufactoria passages. Now they were corrupted. Massive support columns, once straight and proud, now curved at unnatural angles. Entire walls had fused with grotesque growths of warped metal, organic in form, pulsing softly as though breathing. Patches of reality itself flickered like bad Vox transmissions, the air shimmering unnaturally as warp contamination gnawed at the boundaries of the material world. Here, in the machine labyrinth, the line between flesh and steel was no longer absolute. Graia's ancient forge warrens were vast, built over millennia of mechanicus labor. Entire layers of production lines had collapsed or been abandoned long ago, leaving behind a subterranean catacomb where light had not touched in centuries. Many of the tech priests who had dared to excavate these lower levels had vanished without record. It was here that the rogue magi had made their hidden sanctum, protected by labyrinthine complexity and their growing mastery of forbidden warpcraft. Malum paused at an intersection. A dozen roots branched outward like the limbs of some mechanical beast. The servo skull flickered briefly as it triangulated the artifact's corrupted warp signature. It spun left and hovered forward, guiding him toward a narrower service tunnel choked with ruptured cabling and partially collapsed supports. As he passed beneath a sagging archway, Malum's helm picked up faint audio distortion. Whispers, indistinct at first, half-heard voices murmuring in languages that no human tongue should form. Warp echoes, the immaterium bleeding through. He clenched his jaw and activated the psychic dampeners within his armor. Blessed wards flickered to life across his pauldrons, filtering the worst of the corruption's psychological assault. The Emperor is my shield, my faith is my armor. Without warning, the servo skull halted mid-air, its lenses flashing crimson. Enemy signatures pulsed on Malum's retinal display, multiple heat sources ahead. Malum switched to low-light vision. Through the haze, shapes emerged, human forms, but no longer men. Chaos cultists. These were not the mindless rabble often encountered among the heretic ranks. They were former tech adepts of Graia, now fully committed to the Dark Mechanicum's heretical creed. Their flesh was partially fused with their bionic augmentations, twisted into grotesque parodies of the machine god's servants. Servo arms jutted from swollen backs, tipped with surgical blades caked in dried blood. Red ocular lenses glowed unnaturally bright in the gloom. Tubes ran from their respirators into bulbous growths across their bodies, pulsing rhythmically like cancerous organs. Some had replaced entire limbs with mechanized claws, while others wielded makeshift plasma cutters and industrial drills as weapons. Their robes still bore the faded sigils of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but those symbols had been defaced with runes of chaos. The heretic closest to Malum hissed a string of corrupted binaric code, its voice warbling as vox distortion mangled the words into guttural screeches. Malum's bolter was already raised. His first shot struck true. The lead cultist's head detonated in a shower of bone and leaking fluid. The body crumpled as the remaining heretics surged forward, shrieking blasphemous canticles. The Omnissiah is reborn through entropy. Bless the machine spirit with mutation. They opened fire with scavenged lescators and magnetic rifles. Coherent beams of energy lanced toward Malum, sizzling against his armor's ablative plating. Sparks danced along his pauldrons as glancing hits struck home. One plasma burst splashed across his left vambrace, burning deep into the ceramite. Pain flared along his arm, but the auto-senses compensated. Malum moved forward like a force of nature. His bolter roared with disciplined fury. Vengeance rounds tore through multiple heretics with each shot, detonating inside their chests and spraying mutated innards across the walls. A cluster of cultists attempted to flank him from an upper catwalk. Malum spotted them, pivoted, and fired a short burst. The catwalk collapsed under the exploding bodies, dropping them into the pit below. A malformed servitor beast, heavily augmented with industrial mining equipment, lumbered from a maintenance tunnel. Its frame was fused with drilling arms, rotary saws, and hydraulic crushers. Where once it had been a lobotomized worker slave, now it served the Dark Mechanicum's perverse will. The abomination charged, heavy footfalls shaking the deck plating. Malum activated his chains ward, the blade snarled to life, its teeth spinning in a high-pitched whine as he met the servitor head-on. The creature swung a massive piston-driven arm toward him. Malum ducked beneath it, sparks erupting where the crusher smashed into the bulkhead behind him. He drove his chains ward upward into the servitor's gut, sawing through metal and flesh. The beast spasmed violently as its core systems failed, showering Malum with spurts of hydraulic fluid and molten oil. With a final shudder, it collapsed in a heap of burning scrap. The remaining heretics faltered. Malum advanced, his bolter barking with unrelenting precision, executing each heretic where they stood. In moments, the corridor fell silent, littered with the remains of twisted flesh and shattered machinery. He paused only briefly to assess his armor's damage. His left vambrace was heavily scorched, his external aspects partially damaged, but his systems were still operational. The servo skull pulsed again, leading him onward. The deeper he pressed, the stronger the warp presence became. The industrial corridors narrowed further, twisting unnaturally. In places, Malum passed through chambers where entire sections of wall had melted into viscous, fleshy growths, their surfaces studded with blinking mechanical eyes that tracked his movements. Chittering noises echoed from ventilation shafts above. Flickering warp light formed geometric patterns in the air, warping perspective and threatening to unmake the laws of physics. Malum felt the oppressive pressure of the immaterium gnawing at his mind, but his focus never wavered. He recited litanies of steel with every step. He imagined the voice of Guilliman himself guiding him forward. There is no peace, only duty. At last, the servo skull halted before a towering adamantium blast door. Ancient Mechanicus warding sigils glowed faintly on its surface, overwritten in many places by heretical runes. This was one of the vault entrances. Beyond this door lay the corrupted heart of Graia, the vault where Drogon's forbidden power core fragment was hidden, the very object that had once drawn Nemeroth, the same artifact that now threatened to tear open the rift once more. Malum rested his hand briefly on the door's cold surface. He was close, but the true horrors had not yet revealed themselves. He readied his bolter once more. The descent into hell had only just begun. The great vault door loomed before Malum Caedo like a silent judge. Its surface was ancient, marked by both reverence and desecration. The original iconography of the Omnissiah was etched into the adamantium with the delicate precision only the Mechanicus could craft. Fractal patterns, cog-toothed sigils, and sacred binary invocations to the machine god. But over these once holy inscriptions, new symbols had been scorched into the metal, profane runes that pulsed faintly, as though alive, carved by hands that no longer served Mars or Terra. At its center, where once the sign of the Aquila had proudly spread its wings, now sat a warped 8-pointed star, the mark of chaos. Malum Caedo's helm sensors twitched as they attempted to stabilize the fluctuating energy readings radiating from the vault. Both mechanical and warp-borne energies twisted together in unnatural patterns. Reality was thinner here. The boundaries strained and flexed like taut wire, as if the vault stood directly upon a raw nerve of the immaterium. The servo skull halted mid-air before the vault, its auspex relays glowing crimson. Its cogitators churned in a frantic hum, processing the corrupted encryption that barred further entry. The corrupted magi had sealed themselves within. Malum placed his gauntleted hand against the door, feeling the tremor beneath his palm. It pulsed like the heartbeat of a wounded beast. Somewhere beyond this gate, the fragment of Drogon's warp core sang its silent song, a resonance that called to the foul creatures of the immaterium. The longer it remained active, the stronger its beacon became. He stepped back, calculating. The heretics had sealed the vault from within using Mechanicus override protocols combined with sorceress wards. No simple breaching charge would suffice here. No amount of brute force alone would crack a door designed to withstand orbital bombardment. But Malum Caedo had not come unprepared. His mission parameters had anticipated this. Attached to his belt was a compact Mechanicus null key, gifted by Inquisitor Seabell herself. Within its crystalline core was encoded a complex sequence of override subroutines and counter-rites designed to bypass corrupted Mechanicus code. It was not perfect. The heretics' rituals had deeply fused machine code with warp logic, but the null key might grant him entry, if only for a time. Malum inserted the null key into the vault's recessed data spike interface. The skull's lumen filters dimmed as power surged through the conduit. Sparks erupted. The door vibrated violently. Malum's helm displayed reams of flickering binaric symbols, many corrupted by the presence of warp logic, entropic loops, recursive paradoxes, nonsensical equations that defied machine reasoning. The null key struggled against the blasphemous encryption, purging corrupted subroutines in real time. Purging. Override engaged. Sanctified access granted. With a final mechanical groan, the vault door's massive locking clamps disengaged. The first gate opened. The blast door split in two, heavy halves grinding apart in slow, reluctant submission. As the gap widened, a wave of stagnant air rushed outward, carrying with it the foul aroma of ozone, machine oil, and something far more rancid. The scent of unholy corruption that no man should ever smell. Malum advanced. The chamber beyond was vast, a cathedral of industry hollowed out within the planet's bedrock. High overhead, broken cranes hung from titanic rafters like the skeletons of long-dead beasts. The chamber was filled with the flickering glow of warp-tainted lumens. Their light wavered unnaturally, bending around corners where nothing existed, as though reality itself was struggling to maintain its structure. At the far end of the chamber stood an enormous containment spire, once a proud Mechanicus structure designed to hold the warp core in stasis. Its towering vertical cylinder was wrapped in hundreds of magnetic stabilizer rings, each inscribed with ancient red-lit Mechanicus sigils. But the stabilizers no longer held firm. Warp flame licked between the rings. The air shimmered as though the entire structure sat half within real space and half in the immaterium. Beneath the spire gathered a congregation. Malum's optical sensors locked onto the figures moving below. Dozens of heretics, more twisted than those he had encountered above. Many had fully surrendered their flesh to the dark Mechanicum's gifts. Hunched forms fused with centipede-like mechanical tails, multiple servo limbs sprouting from their shoulders, dozens of red photoreceptors blinking from their faces. Some dragged themselves forward with piston limbs while chanting in binaric corruption. Around them moved lesser tech cultists, organic acolytes adorned with patchwork robes, copper wiring, and brandished ritual daggers etched with chaotic sigils. The assembly chanted in disharmonic waves, voices rising in maddening cadence. The Omnissiah reveals its true form. The binary flesh is mutable. The warp and machine are one. At the head of the congregation stood a high priest of corruption, a Magos Dominus, his once pristine red robes now blackened and embroidered with warp-forged filigree. His lower torso had been entirely replaced by a massive tracked platform upon which dozens of mechanized appendages whirred and clicked. His cranial vault was elongated, his flesh partially transparent, revealing writhing cables where veins once pulsed. Above his exposed brain hovered a rotating halo of bronze rune discs, each inscribed with blasphemous calculations that altered with every second. Calculations not meant for mortal minds. This was no longer a servant of the machine god. This was something else entirely. The final convergence approaches, the Magos bellowed in a voice amplified by multiple overlapping vox emitters. The core awakens. The great unbinding draws near. Malum Caedo did not hesitate. He activated his vox beacon, transmitting a short burst directly to Inquisitor Cybele above. His position was logged. The vault had been breached. Now came the purge. He raised his bolter and fired. The first vengeance round struck a robed acolyte mid-chant, detonating the heretic's torso into a shower of burning viscera. The congregation reeled, breaking formation. Intruder! Astartes! Purge the loyalist! The chamber erupted into chaos. Lass beams and autogun fire spat across the distance, wildly inaccurate against Malum's advancing form. His armor absorbed the impacts as he closed the distance, firing disciplined bursts that tore through multiple cultists at once. Explosive rounds burst within enemy ranks, ripping apart those foolish enough to form shield lines. Limbs and internal servos scattered across the cathedral floor. Smoke filled the air as Malum continued his methodical advance, moving like an executioner through a sea of heresy. But the heretics were not defenseless. Heavy servitors, jury-rigged into mobile gun platforms, rolled forward from hidden alcoves. Mounted grav cannons and arc flamers lit up the chamber, spewing sheets of ionized death across the approach. Malum engaged his auto-senses, marking their firing arcs and slipping between bursts with inhuman precision. He tossed a crack grenade beneath the closest servitor. The explosive charge detonated beneath its armored tread, flipping the machine into the air in a burst of oil, flame, and shrieking metal. Two more advanced. Malum vaulted behind a broken pillar, blind-firing two vengeance rounds that exploded inside one servitor's weapon housing, tearing it apart from the inside. The second lunged forward, servos whirring, only to be met by Malum's revving chainsword. The spinning teeth tore through the machine's cranial housing, showering the floor in gears and charred organics as the servitor collapsed. The cultists panicked. Some fled deeper into the facility. Others charged in desperation, blades raised. Malum cut them down without pause, each strike surgical, each burst of bolter fire precise. At last, the chamber was silent again. The Magos Dominus stood alone beneath the flickering containment spire, mechanical limbs twitching, his multiple vox emitters crackling. "Flesh-bound fool," the heretic rasped. "You do not understand what approaches. The core's song will tear open the gates. The great unclean one stirs. Even now, his gaze falls upon you." Malum leveled his bolter. "Your words are meaningless." He fired. The Dominus's head exploded in a shower of gore and shrapnel, the corrupted logic cores embedded in its skull flickering as death claimed the abomination. The chamber fell still. Malum's auto-senses pulsed. The power core still pulsed within its spire, untouched for now. But the warp signature was growing stronger. The worst was yet to come. He reloaded and pressed forward. The vault was conquered. But the war had not ended. The worst had only just begun. Malum Caedo stood before the containment spire, its rings still trembling as arcs of unearthly light crackled between them. The rogue Dominus was dead, but his heretical work had already pushed the warp closer to real space. The energies of the core fragment pulsed with an ominous rhythm, like the beating heart of something monstrous yet unseen. His helm's vox casters hissed and popped, interference as the barrier between dimensions thinned further. Even as he scanned the chamber, fresh warp fluctuations flickered like heat shimmers along the outer walls. The barrier between Graia and the Immaterium was bending, flexing, buckling. And then came the sound. It was not a scream, not a word, not a roar. It was something deeper. A bass vibration that rattled through his armor's servos, a guttural, primal hunger, vibrating within the marrow of the world. It struck at Malum's senses like an ancient drumbeat that preceded slaughter. Then, at the far end of the vault, the first rip appeared. It tore through the air like a jagged wound of red light, reality parting like flesh beneath a scalpel. The walls cracked, metal groaned, and sparks of unreality bled forth. Shapes emerged from the breach, squat crimson forms rippling with muscular rage, horns curving like the weapons of primitive beasts. Blood letters, lesser demons of Khorne, the blood gods' shock troops, instruments of endless slaughter, their singular purpose written into their existence: to kill, to maim, to offer blood for their master's throne. The first wave of bloodletters stepped into the vault on clawed feet, their sinewy bodies slick with the residue of their birthing from the warp rift. Hellblades glowed white-hot in their iron grips, exhaling gouts of warp flame as they vibrated with barely contained fury. Their eyes locked onto Malum Caedo immediately. The demons bellowed in unison, raw, primal war cries that shook dust from the vault's rafters. Malum did not hesitate. He fired his bolter at the lead bloodletter. The vengeance round impacted the demon's chest, detonating in a spray of ichor. The creature staggered, but unlike mortal flesh, demonic bodies were not easily undone. The monster howled but kept charging. 5 more surged forward behind it. Malum planted his feet and fired controlled bursts, each shot center mass, each aimed with perfect astartes precision. 2 more bloodletters fell, their forms unraveling into crimson mist as their tether to reality was severed. But the others closed the distance swiftly. The first of the demons leapt at him. Malum sidestepped, letting its blade strike the ferocity beside him, sparks showering his visor. With one fluid motion, he ignited his chainsword and drove it through the demon's flank. The weapon's roaring teeth bit deep into warp flesh, shredding muscle and bone as the creature's scream echoed in his ears. The demon evaporated into smoke and fire as it was banished back to the immaterium. Another bloodletter came from behind. Malum spun, blocking the incoming hellblade strike with the flat of his armored vambrace. The demon's unnatural strength drove him back several steps, metal screeching under his feet. Malum retaliated. He slammed his chainsword horizontally, severing the demon's arm. Ichor sprayed as the creature shrieked, but the Ultramarine allowed no pause. He followed through, decapitating the bloodletter with one final upward arc. 3 more charged in unison. Malum activated his jump pack's emergency burst jets, propelling himself upward for a brief second. He landed behind them, his bolter already raised as he fired at point-blank range. 2 exploded instantly. The third swung wildly and missed. Malum countered with a precise chainsword thrust through its gaping maw. The vault began to tremble again. Another tear ripped across the vault's opposite side. The air rippled as yet more bloodletters poured forth, accompanied now by even more disturbing forms, flesh hounds of Khorne. 4-legged beasts covered in iron-hard muscle and plated bone, their heads adorned with jagged fangs that dripped with warp venom. Chains clinked from their collars as they bounded forward on clawed paws that tore gashes into the floor with every stride. One of the flesh hounds roared a subsonic bark that momentarily overloaded Malum's audio receptors. The beast charged. Malum met its bulk head-on. It lunged for his throat, snapping its fanged jaws inches from his helm. He drove his armored fist into the creature's muzzle, forcing it back. The second flesh hound attempted to flank him. Malum pivoted, blasting it square in the chest with a concentrated plasma shot from his auxiliary pistol. The plasma bolt liquefied its torso in a burst of vaporized gore. The first flesh hound renewed its attack, leaping again with incredible speed. This time, Malum ducked low and drove his chainsword upward, embedding it into the creature's ribcage. The demon spasmed violently as its essence unraveled in a brilliant surge of warp light, its shrieking soul sucked back into the hellscape that birthed it. The vault now writhed in chaos. The rift grew wider with every moment, feeding on the blood spilled in its proximity. The very walls of the chamber twisted unnaturally, bending like wax under flame. Gravity fluctuated, causing debris to float, then slammed downward as reality fought to maintain its integrity. Malum's armor screamed damage warnings into his HUD, but his focus remained absolute. He calculated. The warp core fragment was acting as a lodestone, amplifying the breaches as the rift expanded. The ritual begun by the heretics had transformed the artifact into a beacon, attracting every demon within the sector's warp currents. If he could sever the fragment's amplification matrix, the rift might collapse. But the bloodletters continued to pour forth, more than he could slay alone. Suddenly, his Vox link crackled to life through the distortion. Stern Guard Caedo, this is Inquisitor Cybele. We detect catastrophic warp fluctuations converging on your coordinates. The rift is approaching full destabilization. Confirmed, Malum replied between bursts of gunfire. Demon reinforcements emerging continuously. I am engaging. Hold your position, Cybele ordered. Reinforcements are inbound. The message ended, but Malum knew time was limited. Reinforcements might arrive, but seconds mattered. A new tremor shook the chamber. Malum turned toward the rift and saw it. Something far larger stirred within the breach. Not another bloodletter. Not even a greater flesh hound. Something ancient, something corpulent. A presence so massive it caused the air itself to warp as it struggled to cross the veil. A shadowy form, bloated and seething, began to push its bulk through the widening hole. The servants of Khorne had been merely the vanguard. Now something worse was coming. Malum narrowed his eyes behind his visor. "Not while I draw breath," he growled. He reloaded his bolter, primed his remaining grenades, and braced himself. The next battle would test every ounce of his resolve, and only one would walk away from the coming slaughter. The breach was no longer a wound, it had become a mouth, and now it opened wide. Malum Caedo watched as reality tore itself apart before him. From within the pulsing rift, the bloated mass of the great unclean one forced itself into existence. Flesh, like congealed sewage, bulged grotesquely as it slipped through the thinning veil, ripples spreading across its blubbery skin like oil floating on polluted water. Pustules as large as human heads throbbed and burst, spraying trails of yellow pus that hissed and sizzled against the deck plating. Its immense feet landed with seismic force, flattening cultist corpses beneath its bulk. Mechanical servitors abandoned by the fallen heretics crumpled beneath its titanic weight. The chamber groaned as the entity completed its crossing, the dimensional wound stabilizing just long enough to allow its form fully into the material realm. A towering mountain of filth and rot, the demon radiated the foul essence of Nurgle, grandfather of pestilence, lord of decay. Where bloodletters were rage and speed, the great unclean one was inevitability incarnate. It did not rush. It did not need to. Every heaving breath it exhaled carried swarms of warp flies and clouds of necrotic spores that discolored the air itself. The vapor corroded metal where it drifted and blackened the floor into blistered pits of disease. Dozens of giggling nurglings tumbled from the open sores of its belly, their tiny fanged mouths chittering madly as they crawled across its folds, dripping from rents in its distended gut. Each nurgling was a fragment of its greater form, an extension of its twisted will. The daemon raised its enormous head and fixed its jaundiced, milky eyes upon Malum Caedo. When it spoke, it was as if the planet itself whispered in a voice soaked in rot, a little one has come to play." Its voice gurgled like bile churning in a diseased stomach. The sound scraped at the edges of Malum's mind, filled with mockery and perverse affection. "You stand alone, child of dead Guilliman. Look at you, so small, so clean, but you will join my garden soon. All things rot, little blue thing. All things rot." Malum's reply was his bolter. He fired directly at the demon's face. The vengeance round detonated against its bulbous cheek, tearing open a new wound that oozed greenish ichor down its chins. The great unclean one barely noticed. Instead, it chuckled. A deep, rolling, wet laugh that shook the floor beneath Malum's boots. "Delightful," it gurgled, arms wide. "We shall share such joy together." The Nurglings surged forward. Dozens of the squirming creatures formed a crawling carpet, their high-pitched shrieks filling the chamber. Malum fired into their ranks, each shot reducing several to sludge, but the swarm was relentless. They closed around him like a living tide. Malum activated his jump pack, igniting a short blast that propelled him backward onto a higher platform, a collapsed crane arm that jutted into the vault like the broken rib of a giant. From this elevated position, he resumed firing, bolter shells tearing apart the crawling horde. Yet, for every Nurgling that died, more spilled from the demon's ruptured belly. It was not a wave, it was a fountain. "There is no end to the blessings of Grandfather," the demon laughed, spraying globs of slime from its ruined mouth. Malum's vox crackled again. Inquisitor Cybele. "Sternguard Caedo, we are detecting massive warp spike readings converging on your location. The ritual is near critical failure. The artifact must be secured or destroyed immediately." Acknowledged. He analyzed the containment spire again. The warp core fragment was still locked inside its reinforced housing, but the Great Unclean One now stood between him and the objective. There would be no careful solution. Malum knew what must be done. He retrieved his remaining melta charges, potent fusion explosives capable of liquefying reinforced ceramite. It would not destroy the warp core entirely. Only the Ordo Malleus possessed the containment protocols to dismantle such a thing safely, but it could disable its amplification systems. Sever the ritual, collapse the rift, deny the enemy. "You will not reach your pretty toy," the demon wheezed as it lumbered forward. "You cannot stop my gift. Soon, the air itself will choke with life." A massive, rusted cleaver manifested in the creature's swollen hand, a crude slab of iron etched with pulsating runes of virulence. With unnatural speed for something its size, the demon hurled the cleaver across the chamber. Malum leapt aside as the blade cleaved into the crane arm, shearing it in two. He tumbled onto the deck below, rolling beneath a storm of debris, then rose instantly to a firing stance, pumping 2 more rounds into the demon's exposed belly. The monster staggered but did not fall. Its giggling voice rasped, "Oh, you do tickle." The Nurglings closed again. This time they were joined by something larger, plague bearers. Tall, emaciated demon warriors, one-eyed and horned, their bloated bellies swinging as they marched with their rusted swords raised high. Each footfall oozed filth, each breath exhaled a cloud of choking rot. The plague bearers chanted in unison, "One eye sees, one mouth gags, one god reigns." Malum met them head-on. His chainsword revved, roaring through the first plague bearer's ribcage in a vertical cleave that split it in two. Another struck low, nicking his leg greave. The acidic blade hissed against ceramite, but failed to penetrate. He blasted 2 more plague bearers apart with point-blank bolter fire. Each time their bodies dissolved, more rot splashed across the floor, feeding the seething atmosphere. The demon bellowed again, "Bleed, little one, join my children." The Great Unclean One lumbered forward, crashing through pillars, sweeping aside the dead as though clearing a banquet hall. Malum retreated toward the spire's base, closer now, just meters from the core housing. He placed the melta charges as he moved, one on each stabilizer ring. "Purification by fire," he muttered through clenched teeth. The Great Unclean One saw his goal and roared in frustration. "No! Mine!" The bloated monster surged forward, its bulk crashing toward him like an avalanche of rotting flesh. Malum slammed the final charge into place. The demon raised its cleaver for a final strike. Malum detonated the charges. The world erupted. Superheated gouts of plasma fire burst from the stabilizers, turning metal to liquid in an instant. The housing ruptured, releasing the fragment's volatile energies into a chaotic burst that sent the entire vault quaking. The warp core's amplification matrix collapsed. The rift above it convulsed violently, folding in on itself as the portal's unstable edges began to shriek and fracture. Warp lightning crackled across the vault, severing reality in jagged streaks. The great unclean one screamed as portions of its body were caught in the collapsing currents. Its immense mass distorted, warping like molten wax under impossible pressure. "No, I am not finished!" Its voice was sucked into the vortex as the rift began to implode. Malum sprinted for cover, ducking behind a ruined support pillar as chunks of falling ceiling rained down. The warp winds howled like tormented souls dragged back into the void. Seconds passed like centuries. Then, silence. The rift was gone. The great unclean one was banished. Only the wreckage of the vault remained. Malum Caedo emerged from the rubble, armor blackened and scorched, but alive. "Stern Guard Caedo," Cybel's voice returned, clearer now. "The rift is collapsing. Your actions have stabilized the sector. Extraction team en route." Malum allowed himself no celebration. "The artifact is neutralized," he confirmed. "The enemy remains." For though the warp breach was closed, the Black Legion still lingered. Their master, Tumulus Samael, had yet to reveal himself. Malum reloaded his bolter. The true war was not yet done. The vault lay shattered behind him. The warp core fragment, once the beacon of corruption, now lay silent beneath molten slag and fractured containment coils. The breach had collapsed, dragging the great unclean one screaming back into the immaterium. Graia had been spared annihilation for now, but Malum Caedo knew the victory was incomplete. The real architect of this heresy had not yet revealed himself fully. The Black Legion was still present. Their master still moved unseen. Tumulus Samael. The name alone carried weight, a sorcerer of no small power, known among the Inquisition's hidden archives as a warband leader who had evaded purges for over a century. Not a pawn like Nemeroth before him, but a tactician, a ritualist, a conjurer of immense skill who manipulated others from the shadows while preserving his own life. The collapse of the vault would not have broken Samael. If anything, it would drive him toward desperation, and desperate traitors were dangerous. Malum's vox chimed once more. "Stern Guard Caedo, this is Inquisitor Cybel. The core destabilization has drawn Samael out. We have tracked multiple Black Legion formations withdrawing from the Manufactoria sectors." "He is attempting to escape," Malum responded. "Negative," Cybel corrected. "Not escape. He is consolidating. Data suggests Samael is falling back to the Grayan Crown." Malum's helm display updated as orbital scans fed into his HUD. The Grayan Crown, an immense orbital station that hung in geostationary lock over the equator of Graia. A relic of the world's Titan foundries, once used for the construction and orbital deployment of god machines. Now abandoned for decades, it had served as a hidden staging ground for Samael's forces. It made sense. High above the planet's atmosphere, the station was free from the environmental instability of the warp rift. It would serve as a perfect platform for further summoning rituals, and as an evacuation point if the war turned against him. "I will pursue," Malum said, voice cold and resolute. "Reinforcements will rendezvous with you in low orbit," Sable replied. "Do not allow Samael to escape. The artifact's failure will drive him to desperation." "Understood," Malum said. "Samael dies this day." The extraction servitor arrived quickly, a modified Thunderhawk gunship sent by Cybel's vessel, Oath of Judgment. The gunship's grav clamps extended and locked onto Malum's reinforced pauldron, hoisting him vertically out of the devastated vault like a hunter pulling prey from a pit. As Graia's surface fell away beneath him, Malum briefly surveyed the world's scarred remains. Collapsed Manufactoria, burned out forges, and thousands of dead, both loyalist and traitor alike. planet had survived yet another cataclysm, but at terrible cost. The sky above twisted in unnatural patterns as the last echoes of the warp breach faded. Malum's focus, however, was no longer upon Graia's surface. The real battle awaited him in orbit. The Grayan crown loomed ahead, a silent ring of metal encircling the planet like a celestial halo. The orbital station's immense structure remained largely intact, though much of it was dark and abandoned. Industrial docking arms protruded from its skeletal hull, still bearing the scars of ancient wars. Most of its external defense turrets were inactive or cold, but not all. As the Thunderhawk approached, static flooded the Vox. Enemy anti-air batteries powering up, the pilot warned. Red flashes lit the void as corrupted macro-cannon emplacements opened fire. Long-dormant defensive turrets, now repurposed by the Black Legion, spat lances of energy toward the Thunderhawk's approach vector. The pilot banked hard, engines screaming as the gunship evaded the first barrage. Plasma streaks arced past, narrowly missing the hull. "Prepare for rapid insertion," came the pilot's shout. Malum stood ready at the bay doors, his jump pack humming at full charge. The targeting display flashed as the LZ marked itself, a ruptured maintenance breach in the crown's outer ring. "Drop in 3, 2, 1. The bay doors blasted open. Malum launched himself into the void, his armor's maneuvering thrusters corrected for orbital velocity, guiding him through the vacuum toward the breach. He impacted hard, boots magnetizing to the deck plating as he landed within the station's skeletal inner corridors. The Grayan crown was cold and silent inside. Long corridors, once filled with the clatter of Titan assembly, were now abandoned, their ferrocrete walls stained with centuries of rust and neglect. Sparse emergency lumens flickered in the darkness. Strange glows pulsed faintly from deeper within, signs of Samael's rituals. Malum advanced quickly but methodically. The station's skeletal corridors amplified every footstep, but he was not trying to conceal himself. The Black Legion already knew he was here. Sure enough, resistance came swiftly. The first ambush struck from behind a collapsed bulkhead. Black Legionnaires in corrupted Mark VII power armor, their black ceramite etched with golden trim, horns and spikes protruding from their pauldrons like trophies. Their bolters roared as they opened fire in unison. Malum dove into cover behind a twisted support column as mass reactive rounds detonated around him. One round struck his shoulder plate, cracking ceramite but failing to penetrate. "You face the sons of Horus, loyalist wretch," one traitor bellowed. Malum's reply was precise and deadly. He emerged from cover and fired 2 vengeance rounds in rapid succession. The first struck the lead traitor's chest plate, blasting open his rib cage. The second detonated inside the helm of another, spraying gore across the deck. The remaining Chaos Marines charged, revving corrupted chain blades as they advanced. Malum met them head-on. The first swing came low. He sidestepped and drove his chainsword through the heretic's thigh, severing the limb before pivoting and decapitating him with a clean upward stroke. Sparks and ichor sprayed across his visor. The second traitor swung wide with brutal strength. Malum parried the blow, letting the blade glance off his vambrace, then countered with a shoulder check that knocked the heretic off balance. One clean bolter shot followed. The traitor's helm detonated as the mass reactive shell found its mark. The corridor fell silent once more. Malum pressed onward, deeper into the crown's core. Every step brought him closer to Samael. The inner sanctum of the Grayan crown was no longer recognizable as imperial. The sorcerer had turned it into a ritual chamber, a temple to chaos. The floor was etched with vast summoning circles. Warp lightning arced through the air, forming unnatural halos that spiraled overhead. Floating runes drifted through the chamber like glowing embers, each pulsating with blasphemous intent. At the chamber's center stood Tumulus Samael. He was taller than an ordinary astartes, his power armor mutated by the warp's touch. Gold-inlaid runes crawled across his black ceramite, as though alive, wrapping around spiked ridges that protruded from his gauntlets and gorget. His helm was horned, its visor glowing with twin burning embers. In his right hand he held a demon staff, a barbed weapon crackling with warp fire, its tip crowned by a shrieking skull that moaned as it pulsed with power. Behind Samael, the final remnants of the ritual glowed, a secondary warp core amplifier, smaller but still functional. With it, he sought to reopen the rift, desperate to reclaim what Malum had denied him below. Samael's voice slithered across the chamber like oil on water. I watched you, Ultramarine. I saw you butcher my cult. I saw you banish my servants, but you will not halt me now. You are too late. Malum raised his bolter. No sorcerer, he growled. I am right on time. The duel for Graia was about to begin. The chamber trembled beneath the raw weight of warp energy. Tumulus Samael stood like a black monument of blasphemy amidst a maelstrom of his own making. Runes spun in slow, deliberate orbit above his horned helm, each whispering alien syllables into the thick air. His demon staff pulsed with crimson lightning that crackled and arced in unpredictable bursts, scorching nearby deck plates. Malum Caedo advanced steadily across the sanctum floor, boots striking against the iron panels as the two warriors locked gazes across the widening expanse. The Ultramarines' presence was a contradiction to everything around him, an anchor of stability, duty, and righteous fury in a chamber drowning in corruption. His bolter was raised, chainsword humming at his side, both weapons eager for what was to come. For a moment there was silence, a moment before battle. Samael's voice finally slithered through the sanctum, its tone cold yet triumphant. You are a stubborn thing, Ultramarine. You should have fallen in the Manufactoria, broken beneath the weight of Nurgle's finest. You should have dissolved in the vault, screaming as the rift consumed you. And yet, you stand. Malum's response was flat, unflinching. I stand because the Emperor wills it. The sorcerer chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that reverberated across the vault. Ah, yes, the Emperor. That silent corpse whose name you chant like a fool in the dark. He has no power here, Astartes. Only the true gods speak. Only they reshape the stars. The sanctum pulsed again as Samael extended his free hand. The air around him twisted, and 3 floating demonettes materialized from swirling warp portals, twisted, elegant creatures of Slanesh, their bladed claws dripping with iridescent ichor. Malum wasted no time. His bolter roared. The first demonette's torso erupted as a vengeance round detonated within, reducing its slender frame to a burst of multicolored vapor. The second charged, zigzagging unnaturally fast. Malum pivoted, compensating, and fired again. Another kill. The third leapt high, its claws spread wide in an aerial lunge. Malum sidestepped at the last instant, drawing his chainsword and driving it up into the creature's chest as it sailed past. The weapon's screaming teeth tore through warp flesh, splitting the damonette in half before it could strike. Its 2 halves twisted unnaturally before dissolving into screaming ribbons of light. Samael did not move. He simply watched. You are impressive, Ultramarine. So precise, so pure. You could have ruled beside me, you know. Your strength is wasted on loyalty. Enough, Malum interrupted. You sought to rip open the immaterium above Graia. You brought plague, demon, and heresy. Your judgment is now. With that, he opened fire directly at Samael. The sorcerer raised his demon staff, forming a shimmering warp shield before him. Malum's bolter rounds struck the barrier and detonated harmlessly, reduced to sparks and smoke as they impacted the glowing field. "You think I did not anticipate you?" Samael snarled. "You are a weapon built for war, but I am war's master." The sorcerer responded with a sweeping motion of his staff. A crackling arc of warp fire launched toward Malum. The Ultramarine activated his gravitic shield module, an ancient relic built into his armor's vambrace. The warp fire impacted the invisible grav field and dispersed in brilliant sprays of crackling violet light, its force redirected into the chamber walls. Malum advanced through the energy storm without hesitation. "You hide behind sorcery," Malum growled, firing again. Samael deflected 2 more bolter rounds, but Malum was closing the distance now. The sorcerer prepared another blast, but this time Malum anticipated him. With practiced precision, he hurled a flash charge from his belt, a blinding sphere of sanctified light. The device detonated mid-air, its holy radiance overwhelming the sorcerer's optics. The warp shield flickered. Malum seized his opening. He closed the gap, chainsword revving as he charged headlong into the sorcerer. Their weapons clashed, the demon staff meeting the teeth of Malum's blade in a shower of sparks. The warp fires guttered, flickering briefly like dying embers before vanishing into nothingness. And for the first time since his feet touched the blasted surface of Graia, Malum Caedo stood in silence. The corrupted sanctum of the Graian crown was still. The corpses of Samael's final guardians lay scattered like discarded wreckage. Where warp lightning had once split the air, only the faint odor of ozone remained. The unstable portals Samael had forced into being flickered one final time before collapsing, their connection to the immaterium severed at last. But Malum remained vigilant. Victory on the surface of a battlefield was never the end. The Emperor had taught him that. Smoke drifted in lazy columns toward the upper vaults. Beyond the shattered remains of Samael's summoning array, exposed deck plating revealed deep cracks in the station's superstructure, tangible evidence of how close the Graian crown had come to annihilation. Had Samael succeeded, the entire station might have been consumed by a permanent rift, becoming yet another anchor for chaos in real space. Malum surveyed the chamber one final time. The sorcerer's body twitched weakly beneath the ruined pile of flesh and armor where it had fallen. What remained of Samael's demon staff crackled weakly with residual energy, the shrieking skull at its head now cracked and lifeless. He did not touch it. Artifacts of chaos were best left for the Inquisition's sanctioned containment teams. Malum voxed to orbit. "Cybele, the target is neutralized. The ritual is broken. Graia's orbit is secure." The response came quickly, sharp and controlled as ever. "Confirmed. The breach is closed. Extraction teams en route. Remaining Black Legion elements are in disarray. Stand by for final cleansing operations." Malum exhaled, not relief, for there was no relief in war, but the focused breath of a soldier confirming the next phase was underway. He was not done, merely advancing. The extraction servitors arrived within minutes, accompanied by a cadre of Cybele's personal retinue, elite stormtroopers of the Ordo Malleus, clad in carapace armor embossed with the inquisitorial rosette. Their mag boots clamped sharply to the deck as they filed into the ruined sanctum, securing the perimeter. The squad's leader approached Malum and saluted with crisp efficiency. "Veteran Caedo, by the Inquisitor's order, this site is now under Ordo Malleus quarantine." Malum nodded once, stepping aside. "The sorcerer's corpse?" the trooper asked. "Intact," Malum replied. "Corrupted relics remain. Do not let your men touch the staff." The trooper acknowledged grimly, then signaled his squad forward. They moved swiftly, beginning the slow and dangerous work of containment and purification. From the far side of the chamber, Inquisitor Cybele herself entered. She walked as one accustomed to danger, her black cloak trailing behind her. Servo skulls hovered nearby, recording the scene for the Ordo's sealed archives. Her eyes met Malum's, betraying none of the awe her subordinates surely felt. But the respect was there, subtle, professional. "You have done your duty with distinction, stern guard Caedo," she said. "The threat demanded it," Malum answered simply. Cybel's gaze shifted to Samael's ruined body. "I underestimated him," she admitted. "I did not believe Samael capable of tapping into the core's residual resonance this effectively. Had you not severed the amplification array below, he would have succeeded." Malum said nothing. The results spoke for themselves. Cybel's voice lowered, more somber. "The Mechanicus will purge Graia's vaults. My acolytes will cleanse this station. The Inquisition will ensure nothing of Samael's work endures. But this war may echo across the stars regardless." Malum's helm turned toward her. "Explain." Samael was strong, augmented by the unnatural gifts of the warp. Each impact sent force shock tremors through Malum's armor servos. Yet Malum was stronger still, his astartes form built not only for strength, but for precision. The two giants circled, locked in a brutal melee. "You are delaying the inevitable, fool," Samael spat as he parried a downward strike. "The warp cannot be denied. Graia will burn. The Imperium will drown." Malum forced the demon staff aside and delivered a crushing headbutt into the sorcerer's helm. The impact cracked one of Samael's horns, sending him staggering back. "You speak," Malum growled, "because you fear." Samael shrieked in frustration and slammed the staff into the floor. Instantly, the chamber's floating runes ignited. Warp lightning lanced out, striking multiple points in the sanctum, causing localized rift fissures to open. From the rents emerged smaller horrors, floating screamers, warp eels, and mutated servo constructs reanimated by chaos energy. Malum was suddenly surrounded. One screamer swooped low, its razor maw snapping toward him. Malum sidestepped, planting a bolter round into its gaping mouth, detonating the creature mid-flight. Another construct lunged from his flank, a corrupted maintenance servitor, now fused with warp flesh and hydraulic limbs. Its saw blade shrieked as it spun toward Malum's neck. He parried with his chainsword, locking the servitor's arm briefly before driving his blade through its skull. The construct twitched violently before collapsing. The swarm was thickening, threatening to overwhelm. Samael raised his staff again, preparing a final surge. "Kneel, Caedo," Samael screamed. "Your death feeds the warp. Your failure completes my ascension." But Malum saw it. The sorcerer was overextending. Each new summoning weakened Samael's focus. His warp shield had thinned, his defenses stretched across too many manifestations. Malum made his decision. He charged. Through the remaining lesser demons, through the collapsing swarm, he forced his way forward. A shrieking warp eel bit into his shoulder plate, only to be crushed beneath his gauntleted hand and hurled aside. Plague flies swarmed his helm, but his suit's filtration systems purged them. The distance closed in heartbeats. Samael unleashed a final blast of raw warp energy, wild, untamed. Malum fired one last bolt around mid-charge. The vengeance round struck Samael's exposed shoulder, piercing his weakened armor. Black ichor sprayed into the air and the sorcerer staggered, losing his grip on the staff. Malum struck. His chainsword sang as it drove into Samael's breastplate. The corrupted ceramite resisted briefly, then yielded as the blessed teeth tore through armor, flesh, and bone. The sorcerer screamed, his voice warping into several overlapping pitches as the demon bound within his staff howled in unison. Malum drove the blade deeper. "In the Emperor's name!" With one final push, the chainsword tore through Samael's chest, bursting from his back in a fountain of blackened viscera. Warp energy burst from the wound as Samael convulsed violently, his demonic augmentations shrieking in pain as their host was undone. Impossible. Samael gasped, blood frothing from his lips. Justice is not impossible, Malum whispered, driving his fist into Samael's helm and slamming him to the ground. The sorcerer twitched once more, then lay still. Tumulus Samael was dead. The chamber fell silent, save for the soft crackle of dying warp fires. Malum Caedo stood victorious, his armor scorched and bleeding from a dozen wounds, but unbowed. Graia was saved, but his war was far from over. The Black Legion does not waste assets like Samael lightly. His warband was only one of many. She folded her gloved hands behind her back. We intercepted fragmented Vox Cant during the battle. His summoning was not only for the Warp Core or this world. He sought to establish a beacon that would draw attention from the greater warbands. Malum absorbed the weight of her words. This was not an isolated heresy, he said. It was the opening strike. Possibly, Sabel nodded. There are whispers of Black Legion elements stirring beyond this sector. What you have slain here may ripple into wider campaigns. The eye is never still. Malum's thoughts darkened. The tendrils of Abaddon reached far, and Graia could have become yet another staging ground for the War Master's eternal war. That is your burden to track, Malum said. My burden is to remain ready. Sibel's thin smile returned. And that, Ultramarine, is why you are dangerous to them. The station rumbled beneath their feet as orbital stabilizers compensated for atmospheric shifts caused by the residual warp distortion. Cybele gestured to her retinue. Prepare him for extraction. We will return to Graia proper before the final cleansing. The descent shuttle cut through the upper atmosphere like a silent blade. Malum stood alone in the bay, arms crossed, watching Graia grow in the viewport's display. The surface still bore fresh wounds, massive craters where Manufactoria once stood, burned-out districts scorched clean by cleansing fire, and entire sectors sealed under Mechanicus quarantine. But the warp storm was gone. The skies were no longer red. The world endured. The shuttle docked with the Inquisition's fortified headquarters on the planet's surface, a towering fortress of blackened stone and steel, recently erected over one of Graia's least corrupted sectors. As Malum disembarked, tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus offered deep mechanical intonations of thanks. They would begin the long, arduous process of reconstructing Graia once more, purging what contamination remained. The Mechanicus knew this cycle well. Forge worlds bled but did not die easily. As Malum entered the decontamination chamber, his war-scarred armor was carefully inspected by purity servitors. Layers of warp residue were burned away with sanctified promethium and electromagnetic pulses, scouring his ceramite plating while preserving the sacred integrity of his battle plate. Once cleansed, he stepped forward into the central command hall, where his final debriefing awaited. Inquisitor Cybele stood beside a secure data vault. Her expression was neutral as always. Graia owes its continued existence to you, stern guard Caedo, she said. Your actions here will remain classified. The official record will attribute this operation to joint efforts by the Ordo Malleus and the Ultramarines' First Company. But the full truth of this war will be sealed. Malum answered without hesitation. Glory is irrelevant. Victory is sufficient. Cybele studied him for a moment before nodding. There are very few astartes who fully understand that. She extended a small adamantium box, its lock sealed with Mechanicus and inquisitorial sigils. Inside was a single memory rosarius, a token of recognition for extraordinary service. The chapter will receive its record of your triumph. Take this with my personal gratitude. Malum accepted the box with a brief nod. The gesture was appreciated but unnecessary. Duty required no reward. The Vox signals from the orbiting Ultramarine strike cruiser now filled his helm's display. His brothers awaited his return. Cybele spoke one final time. "We may call upon you again, stern guard Caedo. The Black Legion will not forget you." Malum turned toward the waiting transport. "Neither will I forget them." Without another word, the Ultramarine departed, his figure disappearing into the ascending dropship that would return him to the stars. Graia was saved, but across the void, the war never truly ended. The glory of Macraga sailed through the void, its cobalt hull cutting silently across the stars. Deep within the strike cruiser's sanctum, Malum Caedo stood alone in the Reclusiam, a vaulted chamber reserved for prayer, reflection, and preparation. Rows of purity seals fluttered faintly in the recycled air. Incense burners wafted thin streams of sacred smoke that spiraled upward toward the statue of Robut Guilliman, his marble likeness carved in precise detail at the altar's peak. Here, in the quiet between wars, Malum found his peace, not in rest, but in readiness. His armor, though reforged and cleansed of warp taint, still bore fresh scars etched during his confrontation with Samael. Scratches from demon claws, pitting from warp fire, cracks where corrupted bolter rounds had struck home. Every mark told a story. Every gouge was a memory. The chaplain entered quietly, as chaplains often did. Brother Sergeant Cato of the Reclusiam approached, his black armor adorned with purity seals and the twin-headed Aquila etched into his breastplate. The skull helm under his arm glinted in the low lumen. "Veteran Caedo," Cato greeted with the calm resonance of one who had seen centuries of war. "The apothecarian reports you are fully recovered." "My body was never in question," Malum replied. "Only the work remains." Cato studied him for a moment, measuring the weight behind the words. "The work never ends, brother. But Graia was a storm few could weather." Malum offered no reply. Praise was unnecessary. Duty fulfilled was its own reward. Cybele's reports reached Macraga, Cato continued. "The Ordo Malleus spoke highly of your actions." "I acted as any son of Ultramar would." Cato smiled faintly. "Not every son of Ultramar would have survived what you faced." The two stood beneath the statue of Guilliman for several moments. Silence in the Reclusiam was sacred. It gave astartes a place to reflect, not as men, but as extensions of the Emperor's will. "Your name has begun to travel, Malum," Cato finally said. "Already the neophytes of the 10th whisper it during training rituals. The chaplains have begun to speak your name alongside Titus and Sidonis." Malum's gaze narrowed beneath his helm. "I require no legend, Brother Sergeant." "You may not," Cato said gently, "but legends are not for us. They are for those who follow, for the recruits who must one day endure their own fires." The words hung in the air. Even Malum could not fully deny them. The Ultramarines did not foster personal glory, but deeds worthy of remembrance were tools, teaching stones for the next generation. "Graia stands," Malum finally said, breaking the moment. "That is enough." But both warriors knew it was never enough. The days passed in the ship's steady journey toward Ultramar. Routine drills continued. Liturgies of purification echoed in the training halls. Even amidst the calm, the ship prepared for war. It always prepared. In the ship's strategium, the shipmaster and senior officers monitored long-range Vox intercepts. Fragmented astropathic reports from the wider segmentum trickled in. What they read was troubling. Cybele had been correct. The Black Legion's ambitions on Graia had not been isolated. Like cracks spidering out from a shattered window, chaos was stirring across multiple sectors. Other warbands had moved to exploit weaknesses. Malum reviewed the data personally. reports of warp activity near Medusa 4, raiding parties of word-bearers operating near the Hadrex anomaly, sightings of Black Legion fleets massing near the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus. In some systems, entire astropathic choirs had fallen silent, choked off by warp storms that grew increasingly unnatural. He knew what this meant. Samael had not acted alone. He had simply been one strand of a wider design. The War Master's shadow extended far beyond one Forge world. And worse, some of the activity hinted at collaboration between war bands. Unified fronts, however temporary, were rare among the traitor legions. When they did occur, they often heralded something far more dangerous than isolated incursions. Abaddon's long war was shifting again. Malum understood his place. He was a sword, not a strategist. The greater deployments were for chapter masters, for the Lord Guilliman himself. But even as a blade, he could read the signs. The Imperium's enemies were preparing for something larger. Several days later, the glory of Macragge transitioned into the Macragge system. The twin suns illuminated the world below, a perfect vision of order and civilization. The homeworld of the Ultramarines, beacon of the Eastern Imperium, cradle of Guilliman's vision. As Malum descended toward the fortress of Hera, his transport passed the statuary gardens, where the names of honored heroes were etched into eternal stone. His own would soon be added to the rolls, whether he desired it or not. He was greeted upon arrival by chapter command, not by Robute Guilliman himself. His duties in the Indomitus Crusade kept him distant, but by chief librarians, masters of sanctity, and the Lord Commander of the First Company. They had read Cybel's full dossier. They knew every detail. The battle within the Grayan vaults, the duel with Samael, the collapse of the Warp Core's amplification, the banishment of demons, the personal elimination of a rising Black Legion threat. One of the senior officers, Captain Jorkin of the First Company, addressed him formally in the stone halls beneath the fortress's great banners. "Veteran Caedo," Jorkan began, "your name has been entered into the roll of honor. You stand now among those few who have faced not only traitor Astartes, but the raw strength of the warp itself, and emerged unbroken." Malum bowed his head slightly. "My brothers fell beside me. Their sacrifice was no less. Their sacrifice has been recorded, as will yours, when your time comes," Jorkan replied gravely. "For now you are returned to active duty." A small pause. "There is little rest in these days, brother." Malum spoke with the weight of experience. "There never was." The other captains exchanged glances, equal parts respect and understanding. There were many who believed that Graia was but the first spark of what was to come. New war fronts were opening across the Segmentum Ultima. The Cicatrix Maledictum, still gaping across the stars, allowed dark powers to slip through even where Imperial bastions stood firm. The Imperium Nihilus teetered on the brink. Malum Caedo would fight again, whether on distant Forge worlds, shattered hive planets, or amidst the void itself. It mattered little. The duty endured, the war endured, and so did he. Later that night, as twin moons hung over Macragge's cold skies, Malum stood before the illuminated shrine of Sidonus, his brother who had fallen on Graia years earlier, during the first conflict that had nearly doomed the Forge world. Malum spoke softly, words meant for no ears but his own. "I finished what you began, brother. Your sacrifice was not forgotten." The wind carried his words upward, lost among the stars. Above him, across the endless gulf of space, war drums beat once more, and Malum Caedo stood ready. The war had not ended, it had only shifted. News traveled through the Imperium like flickers of light piercing a choking storm. The warp was volatile, As always, its tides distorted messages, blurred timelines, and turned reliable communication into whispers lost in the void. Yet even amid the discordant reports, one truth became clear to those who watched carefully. Across the eastern reaches of Segmentum Ultima, fires were igniting, small at first, then larger, and then everywhere at once. Malum Caedo stood once again upon the glory of Macrage, but this time the ship was not returning to Ultramar. It was departing. This new deployment was different from Graia. There were no briefings filled with certainty, no clean mission objectives from the Inquisition, no single world to fortify. Instead, there was only uncertainty and the grim weight of preparation for something far more dangerous than he had faced before. The echoes of Samael's work had spread. The Black Legion had not been idle. In the aftermath of Samael's death, intercepted Vox bursts, captured cultist confessions, and deciphered astropathic transmissions revealed hints of a deeper strategy unfolding in the shadows. While Graia had been a tactical victory, it was also a flare, an experiment. The true campaign was just beginning. Inside the Glory Strategium, Malum stood before the hololithic star map, where faint, flickering red markers pulsed across dozens of systems. The officers of the First Company circled around the projection like silent statues. The display was constantly updating. Intelligence fed from other chapters, the Ordo Malleus, the Navis Imperialis, and scattered Mechanicus outposts. Captain Jorkin pointed at one of the markers. The Hadrex anomaly continues to destabilize. Multiple warp breach signatures confirmed. Imperial colonies lost all contact 5 standard days ago. Another officer spoke. The word-bearers have emerged near Medusa 4, a minor war band, but they operate alongside Black Legion vessels. Coordinated activity, not isolated piracy. Jorkin turned to Malum. The War Master tests his front lines, brother. He probes our borders with precision. Malum studied the display. Unlike the raw fury of orc wargs or the blind hunger of Tyrannid hive fleets, the threat here was colder, more deliberate. The Black Legion moved like a scalpel, cutting weak points across sectors, forcing the Imperium to overextend itself. The War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, was not wasting resources. He was measuring Imperial response times, watching, calculating. And now? Malum asked. Jorkin expanded a separate projection, a distant subsector bordering the unstable warp rift known as the Maelstrom. Arcona. Malum's eyes narrowed. He recognized the name. Arcona was a dead system on Imperial charts, abandoned during the Nova Terra interregnum after suffering planetary collapse and void warfare. It had been deemed too resource-poor to reclaim. The Administratum had written it off long ago. But now, Arcona is active again? Malum asked, his voice sharp. Jorkin nodded grimly. A forward Mechanicus outpost stationed on a nearby mining moon detected massive energy spikes from the system's core world 3 weeks ago. An ancient orbital station has reactivated. The warp signatures resemble those we detected over Graia. The Inquisition believes the Black Legion is attempting another resonance breach. Another warp anchor, Malum said coldly. Jorkin gave the faintest nod. A more successful one. The Maelstrom's proximity made Arcona even more dangerous. Any warp breach here wouldn't just destabilize a single world. It could punch a corridor directly into the Maelstrom's unstable currents, giving the Black Legion a direct pathway into dozens of Imperial sectors. A permanent warp bridge. It was a strategic nightmare. Malum understood immediately why the First Company had been activated in full strength. Who leads the enemy force? He asked. The hololith shifted. A new image appeared. a towering figure in corrupted cataphracti Terminator armor, its black platework scarred with clawed runes and burning warp script. The crimson eye of Horus glared from the chestplate like an unblinking sentinel. "Lord Vorax," Jorkin said. Malum recognized the name instantly. Vorax was not some minor sorcerer like Samael. He was a commander, a true war captain of the Black Legion's splinter fleets, a veteran of the Long War since the Siege of Terra itself. His deeds stained dozens of worlds. His fleet, the Revenant host, was notorious for its methodical planetary decimations. "He is more dangerous than Samael ever was," Jorkin continued. "Not a summoner, a conqueror." Malum's hands clenched briefly around his belt. Vorax did not deal in subtle corruption or demonic pacts. He was pure in his hatred, a destroyer who understood Imperial war doctrine because he had helped create it before his fall. He hunted astartes deliberately, studying their patterns, mimicking the Codex Astartes itself as mockery. "Deployment authorization?" Malum asked. Jorkin's expression hardened. "We move at once. The first company will strike Arcona directly. Vorax is gathering his fleet, but the rift has not fully stabilized yet. If we strike swiftly, we may disrupt the ritual before the breach becomes permanent." A pause. The Inquisition sends its blessing. The Grey Knights are otherwise engaged on the Hellwind front, so this task falls to us. Malum gave the smallest nod. "Then I will stand." The officers saluted, orders disseminated quickly. Within hours, the full might of the First Company was on the move. A precision strike force, not a planetary invasion. If they were successful, the operation would sever Vorax's ambitions before the corruption could take root. But Malum knew the risks. This was not Graia. This was not a desperate defense of a world already under siege. This was the Razor's edge of war, an assault into an active warp convergence against one of Abaddon's most dangerous lieutenants. Failure would not simply cost lives. It would open yet another bleeding wound in the Imperium's already weakened defenses. Malum stood alone in the ship's observation deck as the fleet prepared its jump. Beyond the viewing portals, the stars shone cold and indifferent. Somewhere ahead, Vorax awaited. Somewhere ahead, another chapter of Malum Caedo's unending war was about to be written. He whispered the ancient words under his breath, more for the fallen than for himself. "By Guilliman's hand, by the Emperor's will." The glory of Macraga burned into the warp, and Malum Caedo rode once more toward the abyss. The warp was restless, even aboard a vessel as sacred and fortified as the glory of Macraga. The Immaterium whispered at the edges of sanity. The Gellerfield hummed with ceaseless labor, its protective shield holding back the predatory entities that prowled just beyond real space. Shadows danced along the void shields, formless, watching, hungry. Malum Caedo remained still within his quarters, unmoved by the warp's ceaseless hunger. A warrior of his experience had long since learned to ignore the unspoken whispers clawing at the back of his mind. They were nothing. Echoes. The real enemy awaited ahead. Arcona. The cursed system had returned to life like a corpse reanimated. Once a lifeless graveyard of crumbling worlds, its resurgence was both sudden and unnatural. Warp storms had parted, but only to allow something darker to take root. The hololithic briefings displayed the system's transformation in real time. Orbiting its primary world was now a massive orbital fortress, one that should not have existed, a structure of impossible scale and design. Part station, part shrine, part war machine, the Black Citadel. Vorax's flagship, his stronghold, his command nexus. It was not built from mere metal or mortal hands alone. The sorcerers and demon forges of the Black Legion had reshaped Arcona's orbital remains into something profane, cathedral spires of warped ceramite rising from its surface like jagged spears, chains of adamantium connecting its shattered hulls together like the bindings of a chained beast. Where windows and viewports should have been, there were open voids that pulsed with warp light. Every part of it was wrong. And from its heart, the same kind of warp resonance that had threatened Graia pulsed again, but on a scale far larger. Malum reviewed the augur reports. The warp core technology here dwarfed the unstable fragment that Samael had attempted to abuse. Whatever artifact Vorax had recovered or constructed was not merely a lure, it was a bridgehead. A stabilized anchor point from which the Black Legion could open a rift far larger than anything seen on Graia. If left unchecked, Arcona would become a permanent artery to the maelstrom itself, a gateway, a wound. Malum clenched his fists behind his back as he studied the tactical data. Every fiber of his being recognized the truth. This was no longer an isolated conflict. The Black Legion was assembling a true foothold in the Segmentum Ultima, and that meant only one thing. The Ultramarines had to cut it out before it spread. The assault plan was simplicity itself, in the way only the most dangerous missions often were. The first company would strike directly at the Black Citadel. No drawn-out planetary siege, no long campaigns of attrition. The Citadel was the beating heart of Vorax's operation. Remove it, and the web collapsed. Malum stood with his brothers in the deployment bay as the final preparations began. The strike force would utilize Thunderhawk gunships launched under the cover of Mechanicus jamming fields. Stealth was impossible. Speed would be their shield. By the time Vorax's fleet could fully respond, the first company would already be inside the fortress. Malum's squad, designated Spear of Hera, had been assigned the primary objective: penetrate to the core sanctum and disable the warp anchor. The remaining squads would engage the Black Legion's defenders across the outer sectors, buying precious minutes. The briefing concluded. No one spoke of failure. Such things were not necessary among the sons of Ultramar. Malum sealed his helm as the boarding alarm sounded. The Codex guides us. The Emperor watches. Thunderhawk assault bays roared open. One by one, gunships launched into the void. The descent was violent. Turrets embedded into the outer spires of the Citadel fired with lethal precision, flak rounds detonating into massive shock waves as the Ultramarine strike teams plunged toward their target. Many Thunderhawks spun and weaved through the inferno, their machine spirits roaring defiance. Malum's own gunship shuddered as flak detonations rocked the hull. A direct hit sheared past the starboard stabilizer, but the pilot compensated instantly, guiding them toward a jagged fracture near the Citadel's midsection, a docking maw torn open for the Black Legion's corrupted transports. 30 seconds to breach, the pilot called. Inside the assault bay, Malum's stern guard veterans stood silent, weapons primed. These were warriors who had seen centuries of slaughter, each of them carrying honors and scars that would humble lesser legions. Target, core sanctum, Malum voxed. Purge all resistance, no mercy. By your word, brother sergeant, they replied in unison. The gunship slammed into the dock with brutal force, mag clamps locking onto twisted deck plates as the ramp exploded downward. Malum led the charge. The first defenders were waiting. Black Legionnaires in Baroque Terminator plate advanced down the corridor, their bolters spitting death as corrupted servitors and warp-augmented cultists swarmed beside them. The Citadel's interior pulsed with crimson light, the walls breathing like a living thing as unholy runes scrawled across the metal. Malum's bolter roared with surgical precision. One Terminator's helm erupted as a vengeance round struck home, vaporizing his head in a blossom of fire. His massive form toppled like a felled statue. His brothers followed, advancing in perfect formation, cutting down the traitor horde as they surged forward. Hold formation, Malum voxed. cut the head from the serpent. They advanced deeper into the citadel, step by step, bolt by bolt. The screams of the cultists echoed like the chorus of the damned. Hours seemed to compress into moments as the first company carved its way toward the sanctum. Malum's armor was scarred by enemy blades, his shields battered by psychic strikes, but his advance never faltered. He could feel the anchor ahead now, not physically, but through its wrongness. Its presence gnawed at the edges of reality itself. The citadel's inner chamber finally came into view. A towering cathedral of blackened ceramite and bone greeted him. At its center, suspended between adamantium pylons, was the warp anchor, a great crystalline obelisk spinning slowly, radiating impossible geometries. Tendrils of warp light spiraled into the ceiling above, where a forming rift glowed like an embryonic sun. And before it, clad in his full Terminator plate, stood Lord Vorax, the warlord of the Revenant host. Vorax raised his demon blade, a monstrous weapon forged in the eye of terror itself, its living edge screeching as it tasted the air. "I have been expecting you, Ultramarine," the warlord boomed. His voice carried like rolling thunder across the chamber. "Another son of Guilliman come to die beneath my heel." Malum raised his bolter. "No," he said coldly. "I come to end what your kind began." The clash of titans was at hand. The fate of Arcona, and perhaps much more, hung in the balance. The sanctum pulsed like the heart of some vast, diseased beast. Cables as thick as city streets twisted along the walls, feeding the warp anchor at the chamber's core. The crystalline obelisk spun slowly, its facets bending light into impossible angles, creating ghost images of Malum Caedo and Lord Vorax that shimmered and wavered as though reality itself were uncertain. Warp energy licked at the edges of the rift spiraling above. It wasn't yet fully open, but it was close. With every passing moment, the veil between dimensions weakened further. Vorax's crimson visor blazed as he advanced, his corrupted Terminator plate groaning with unnatural weight. His armor was etched with thousands of tiny runes, each one pulsing softly as if breathing. Tentacle-like cables writhed from his gorget, whispering demonic chants that only warp-twisted minds could comprehend. In his gauntleted fist he carried his demon blade, Mornspire, a weapon older than many stars, its edge alive with shrieking warp wraiths locked into its iron. As Vorax moved, the sword hummed hungrily, eager to feast again. "You are brave to come so far, Ultramarine," Vorax rumbled, his voice amplified by the vox grills embedded in his throat. "Bravery is such a quaint, imperial virtue." Malum's voice was a calm, unwavering blade in reply. "Bravery is not a virtue, it is an expectation." Without further words, they charged. The two warriors collided like planets crashing together. Vorax swung first, Mornspire slicing through the air in a sweeping, horizontal arc. Malum sidestepped by a fraction, the blade hissing past his helm, close enough for its demonic edge to scream in frustration at being denied flesh. Malum countered with his chainsword, its teeth shrieking as they raked across Vorax's Terminator pauldrons, gouging deep scars into the corrupted ceramite, but not yet breaking through. Sparks burst like brief stars between them. Vorax retaliated with a shoulder slam, using the brute mass of his armor to drive Malum backward. The Ultramarine dug in, mag locks anchoring him briefly, but the warlord pressed his advantage. "You face a warrior who fought beneath the banners of Horus himself, fool," Vorax bellowed. "I stood before the Palace of Terra, while your kind were still muling aspirants." Malum didn't answer. He had no interest in the traitor's boasts. His answer was action. He reversed his stance, ducked under a downward stroke, and drove his chainsword up under Vorax's guard. The blessed teeth screeched as they bit into the softer joint beneath the warlord's arm. Black ichor sprayed from the wound as the corrupted servos whined in protest. Vorax snarled and slammed his armored knee into Malum's chest, sending him skidding back across the sanctum floor. Cracks spidered beneath Malum's boots as he steadied himself. "The sons of Gilliman are always predictable," Vorax sneered. "Tactics, order, discipline." The warlord raised his free hand and uttered a guttural incantation in the dark tongue. The runes along his armor flared. Warp energy burst from his palm, twisting into a bolt of crackling green lightning that howled toward Malum like a serpent. Malum braced. His gravitic shield flared to life, intercepting the blast with a field of invisible force. The warp lightning splintered around him, showering the sanctum with cascading sparks of unreality. "Predictable," Malum echoed coldly, "but effective." Around them, the sanctum continued to degrade. The warp anchors spinning increased. Small, localized tears formed along the chamber walls, tiny holes into the immaterium through which chittering demonic eyes blinked and receded. The rift above pulsed like a heartbeat. Even as they fought, the danger multiplied. Malum recognized the risk. They were not merely fighting each other, they were racing against the rupture itself. If the anchor completed its cycle, this jewel would mean nothing. The entire sector would be lost. "You are too late, Ultramarine," Vorax spat, reading his mind. "Even if you strike me down, the anchor will complete its purpose." Malum's voice was iron. "Then I will strike you down first." He surged forward, closing the distance with precision. His chainsword slashed low, forcing Vorax to adjust his stance. Sparks erupted again as Ceramite screamed under the weapon's teeth. Vorax retaliated with brutal power, bringing Mornspire down in a vertical arc. Malum caught the blade with his chainsword crossguard, the two weapons locked together for a moment, pressing against each other as servos whined under the strain. The demon blade shrieked, its imprisoned souls wailing for release. "You cannot win, Caedo," Vorax roared. "The Black Legion endures." "So does the Imperium," Malum replied, eyes unblinking. With sudden force, Malum disengaged, sidestepped, and drew his bolt pistol in one fluid motion. He fired point blank into Vorax's gorget. The explosive shell detonated against the warlord's armor, sending him staggering backward. Chunks of molten ceramite and shattered armor plating rained down onto the sanctum floor. Vorax howled but did not fall. His anger fed the warp around him, drawing stray tendrils of raw energy into his wound. The hole sealed unnaturally as living corruption regenerated the damage. "You are a stubborn pest, Ultramarine," the warlord growled, advancing again. Malum switched tactics. He activated a series of microflares, small lumens blessed by the chaplains before deployment. The flare burst into blinding white light, a sanctified purity designed to destabilize warp-born protections. Vorax reeled, the demonic sigils across his armor flaring erratically. Malum closed the gap. This time, his chainsword bit deep into the already weakened chest plate, slicing into Vorax's torso. The blessed teeth ground against internal servos, flesh and bone. Vorax roared in fury. "You dare!" Malum didn't let him finish. He wrenched the chainsword upward, splitting Vorax's breastplate entirely open with a thunderous screech. Black ichor sprayed in gouts as Vorax faltered. "You bleed, traitor," Malum growled, voice low. "You will fall." The warlord lashed out desperately, his demon blade slashing in erratic arcs. Malum deflected one strike, then another. The third carved a deep gash along his left pauldron, cutting dangerously close to the power pack. But Malum held his ground. Then came the opening. Vorax stumbled, his injuries slowing him. His swing overextended. Malum pivoted sharply and drove his chainsword into Vorax's side, the blade punching through the inner workings of his power core. Sparks and warp fire burst from the wound. "For Ultramar," Malum roared. The chainsword severed internal systems with finality. Vorax howled one last time as warp energy ruptured within him, his body twisting unnaturally under the collapsing force of the demon energies bound to him. The traitor lord dropped to his knees, flames spilling from his ruined chest cavity. "No!" Vorax rasped as the light in his helm dimmed. With one final strike, Malum cleaved downward, splitting helm and skull alike, ending Lord Vorax of the Black Legion. The traitor's massive form crumpled, still steaming, into a broken heap. The sanctum trembled. The warp anchor, now destabilized without its master's control, pulsed violently. Cracks appeared along its surface as containment fields flickered. The resonance destabilized, warp light pouring from the fractures. Malum activated his Vox. "Target eliminated, anchor destabilizing, full collapse imminent." "Confirmed, brother," came Captain Jorkin's voice. "Extraction inbound, purge protocols initiated." As his brothers secured the chamber, Malum watched as melta charges were planted along the base of the anchor. The sacred ordnance would ensure its total annihilation. The countdown began. Malum stood as the charges detonated. The warp anchor fractured, its crystalline structure shattering in a silent, blinding collapse. The forming rift above flickered, convulsed, and then closed violently, like a wounded beast sealed away. Arcana was saved. The wound had been cauterized, and Malum Caedo had once again stood where others had fallen. The war was over. For now. The shattered wreck of the Black Citadel hung lifeless in orbit above Arcona's pale world. Fires still burned within the crippled fortress's broken decks, venting long ribbons of smoke into the void, like black veins against the stars. The glory of Macraga maintained a careful distance, its battle-scarred hull illuminated faintly by the drifting debris field. Around it, the remnants of the First Company's strike fleet held position, their gun batteries still tracking the wreckage, as though daring any lingering threat to rise from the ruin. But nothing did. Not anymore. Inside the strike cruiser's surgical chambers, Malum Caedo stood beneath the cold precision of the apothecarian's manipulator arms. Serrated surgical claws worked swiftly, stripping away the final layers of his armor for inspection. His battered Mark VII plate lay in pieces upon the adamantium decking, scorched, dented, gouged by demon blades and the claws of warp-born monstrosities. His body bore its own share of damage. Ceramite could be reforged, but flesh, even Astartes' flesh, carried its reminders longer. A deep laceration along his left shoulder, hairline fractures in several ribs, dozens of minor burns where warp fire had splashed across his exposed armor joints. The apothecaries worked methodically, their bionic limbs hissing softly as they sealed, stitched, and regenerated damaged tissue. Malum remained perfectly still. Pain was irrelevant. The war had not asked him whether the price was fair. It had only asked whether he could pay it. Later, fully sealed once more in a freshly consecrated suit of armor, Malum stood before the senior command of the First Company. Captain Jorkin stood at the center of the strategium, the projection of Arcona slowly rotating above the hololithic platform. The Black Citadel was gone, its absence marked only by a blank void in the orbital readouts. The warp readings, once dangerously elevated, had stabilized at last. Inquisitor Cybel's distant holographic presence hovered nearby, transmitted from a secure Ordo Malleus vessel, now patrolling the sector's edge. "Arcona is secure," Jorkin announced with finality. "Vorax is dead. The Black Legion's beachhead is destroyed." "Their plan was bolder than we anticipated," Cybel added, her tone clinical. "Had the anchor stabilized, the entire Maelstrom corridor would have opened to their fleets. This could have escalated far beyond Arcona, perhaps beyond this entire segmentum. Her hollow eyes met Malum's through the shifting distortion of the projection. "You have once again prevented the worst, stern guard Caedo." Malum answered only with a nod. The praise meant little. Duty had been fulfilled, but Sibyl, for all her aloofness, understood this about him. She respected it. "New conflicts will follow," Jorkin said grimly, turning back toward his warriors. "The Black Legion will not accept this loss quietly, but today we have delivered them pain they will not forget." A ripple of silent acknowledgement passed among the assembled veterans. "The First Company will remain on high alert," Jorkin continued. "The chapter has requested our return to Macragge for full strategic debrief. The Lord Guilliman himself reviews these breaches now." There was a heavy silence at that name. Though Malum Caedo had never stood personally before Robute Guilliman since his Primarch's return, his influence was felt everywhere. The Indomitus Crusade, the restructuring of the Codex Astartes, the vast realignments of Imperial forces, Guilliman's hand touched every corner of the Imperium now. And if this campaign proved anything, it was that even Guilliman's reforms could not prevent what chaos continued to unleash. Hours later, Malum stood once more at the observation deck. Beyond the thick glass, the dead world of Arcona spun slowly beneath them, its pale surface forever marked by its brief brush with annihilation. The ground bore the scars of orbital bombardments. Great craters like open wounds marred its barren terrain. The Black Citadel was now nothing more than drifting wreckage scattered across high orbit. Malum's reflection stared back at him from the glass. A faceless helm, flawless now, but hollow. He thought of Graia. He thought of the vaults. He thought of Samael, and now of Vorax. 2 traitors, both dead, 2 victories, yet neither final. The Black Legion's designs reached far beyond the worlds he had touched. For every warlord slain, another arose. The Hydra regenerated. The Eye of Terror continued to pulse like a festering sore beyond the cicatrix maledictum. Malum's hands tightened behind his back. The true war was not about a single battle, nor a single world. It was endurance, the capacity to stand when others fell, to fight without end. A faint chime interrupted his vigil. "Permission to approach, brother." Malum turned as Chaplain Caedo entered the chamber. The Reclusiarch carried his Crozius at his side, its golden aquila gleaming beneath the lumen strips. Even after centuries of war, Cato's voice remained steady, like a mountain that had weathered every storm, but still stood tall. "You stood at the brink once more, Malum," the chaplain said as he approached, "and once more you returned." "As ordered," Malum replied. Caedo allowed himself the smallest smile. "Even the Codex does not fully account for what you now carry, brother." Malum's gaze returned to the viewport. "I carry what all Astartes carry," he answered. "We endure." Caedo studied him quietly for a moment. "True," he finally said, "but some burdens grow heavier with each step. There are many who speak your name now, Malum Caedo. Many who whisper of your victories, Graia, Arcona, the demon princes and warlords you have slain." Malum's voice was like steel. "I did not fight for their praise." "Nor should you," Caedo agreed. "But understand this. Your name has become something larger, a symbol for the young, for the neophytes who train even now beneath Macragge's banners, for those who must learn that even against the endless darkness, one may stand." Malum was silent. He had not sought legend, but legends were made nonetheless. Caedo stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There will come a day when even you cannot stand forever, brother," he said quietly. "No warrior fights every war, no blade strikes every blow, but what you leave behind will guide others when you are gone. The words hung between them like an unspoken vow. Malum nodded once. Then let my deeds speak, not my name. Caedo touched a hand to Malum's armored shoulder. As you will it. They stood together in silence, watching the distant wreckage drift. Neither man spoke further. In this moment, there was nothing left to say. Only the endless war ahead. Far across the stars, in places Malum had yet to walk, the Black Legion stirred again. New warbands formed, new plans were whispered in the eye. The War Master's gaze never faltered, but neither did the vigilance of the sons of Ultramar. The next war would come, and when it did, Malum Caedo would be ready. Always ready, always standing, for Ultramar, for the Emperor, for the Imperium. Time within the Imperium was fluid, measured not by days but by wars. In the months that followed the destruction of the Black Citadel, Malum Caedo and the First Company returned to Macraga only briefly. There were no celebrations, no ceremonies, only rearming, reforging, and reassignment. The great war engine of the Imperium ground ever forward, and in its infinite calculations there was always one more campaign. The Black Legion's wounds, though deep, had not stopped their machinations. Arcona had not been their end. It had only been one piece on the War Master's board. Across Segmentum, Ultima, and beyond, other war bands, cults, and agents pushed at the cracks in Imperial space, and some cracks were opening wider than others. The Reclusiam was quiet. Malum Caedo stood once more beneath the towering icon of Guilliman, arms folded behind his back, watching the lumens flicker across the engraved walls. Dozens of purity seals fluttered in the still air, whispering ancient litanies of devotion. Chaplain Caedo entered at a respectful distance. "You've been summoned," Caedo said quietly. "A new front opens." Malum turned, as steady as ever. Another, Caedo confirmed. "This one, different." In the upper strategium, Malum stood before Lord Captain Jorkin and Inquisitor Siebel, whose arrival had once again signaled the involvement of the Ordo Malleus. She remained as cold and precise as before, but her expression this time carried a subtle urgency. The hololithic display projected a system unfamiliar to Malum. The Caldrus Reach, located along a volatile border zone near the Imperium Nihilus, dangerously close to the Cicatrix Maledictum's fluctuating warp storms. The system had been stable once, a minor manufacturing hub far from the great Forge worlds, isolated but loyal. Not anymore. Cybel's voice was direct. 2 weeks ago, all astropathic communication with the Caldrus Reach ceased. The map shifted, highlighting multiple points in crimson. A Mechanicus exploratory fleet sent to re-establish contact discovered something unexpected upon arrival. The system had not fallen to open invasion, but was already lost. Malum's gaze narrowed behind his helm. Lost to whom? Cybel tapped a control rune, and a new image appeared. A derelict station, once imperial, now unrecognizable. Dozens of spires and void anchors twisted unnaturally, reshaped as though pulled into impossible angles by the hand of some malign artist. Suspended above the system's primary world was a massive black mass, part station, part ship, a mobile fortress that radiated warp signature echoes. "The Black Legion?" Jorkin asked. "No," Cybel replied. "Not this time." The image zoomed further, revealing the sigils scorched into the void structure's armor. The 8-pointed star of chaos dominated its hull, but beneath it, coiling like serpents, were the intricate, sinister runes of the Alpha Legion. Malum's fists clenched at his sides. The Hydra, a different breed of heresy altogether. "The Alpha Legion operates here," Malum said. His voice was calm, but his mind was calculating. Cybel's expression hardened. "They've been here for years, perhaps decades, hidden, manipulating. When Caldrus fell, it was not through war, but through subversion. The planetary governors vanished. Defense commanders were replaced. Cult networks bloomed unseen. By the time Imperial agents noticed, it was already too late. Jorkin scowled. Treason from within. The Hydra's preferred method, Seabell said. Now that they hold the system openly, they've fortified it into a staging ground. If left unchecked, this could become a new corridor for infiltration into the wider Imperium Nihilus. The hololith shifted again. Strange energy readings pulsed across the display, distorted, unstable. More troubling, Seibel continued. We have detected unusual warp signatures from within their fortress. Not demonic, like Graia or Arcona. This is different. Controlled. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. The Alpha Legion may be experimenting with stabilized warp shrouds, cloaking technology, augmented by the warp itself. If perfected, they could move entire fleets undetected across the Imperium. Malum absorbed the implications. A hidden fleet could cripple entire sectors before defenses even mobilize. Precisely, Seibel nodded, and they are testing it here. The plan became clear. The Alpha Legion's aim was not simple conquest, it was long-term destabilization. Not overwhelming force, but surgical incisions into the Imperium's arteries. The Hydra's head moved with caution, but once it struck, it did so fatally. The operation was codenamed Spear of Revelation. The Ultramarines' first company would lead the assault directly into the Caldrus Reach. The mission was not conquest, but decapitation. Locate and destroy the Alpha Legion's central command node before their cloaking project reached operational status. Malum Caedo was designated as Strike Commander. His specialty in navigating corrupted strongholds, leading surgical purges, and confronting elite heretic leadership made him the natural choice. Graia, Arcona, now Caldrus. This was his war. Days later, the strike fleet exited warp transit on the edge of the Caldrus system. The first sight was eerie. The primary world glowed with unnatural colors. Vast, lightless cities sat beneath heavy clouds, their infrastructure intact, but occupied by unknown forces. Vox signals were empty. No resistance, no communication, only automated system pulses long since overwritten. Above the world drifted the Hydra's fortress. Massive docking arms extended from its bloated frame, anchoring captured Imperial vessels repurposed for the traitor cause. Cult banners fluttered from external struts. Servitor repair drones crawled along its surface like insects, patching hull damage as new warp nodes pulsed beneath armored shells. The Alpha Legion's fortress had no name. That too was calculated. They deny us even the dignity of names, Jorkin observed as the fleet assumed battle formation. Malum studied the display, reading every defensive vector. They hide behind shadows and riddles, but steel answers all deception. His voice cut through the command deck. Prepare boarding operations. Thunderhawks, boarding torpedoes, and drop pods armed for void assault deployed from launch racks. The first company would not bombard the fortress from afar, it would strike at its heart. The Alpha Legion favored misdirection, infiltration, and traps. But Malum Caedo did not play games. He brought war. As his Thunderhawk descended into the growing storm, Malum whispered once more to the silent stars, "I see you, Hydra. You will bleed like the rest." The shadows of Caldrus were about to be pierced. The Thunderhawk's hull trembled as it sliced through the upper reaches of the Hydra's void fortress. Malum Caedo stood braced, his heavy ceramite boots magnetized to the deck, his eyes fixed on the looming breach site displayed across the holoslit. The fortress grew larger as they closed the distance, a black, angular shape that pulsed with faint green light, like a beast holding its breath beneath the void. Around his squad, the stern guard readied themselves in silence. These were the finest warriors of the First Company, ancient brothers who had weathered 1,000 campaigns. Their bolters had slain traitors, Xenos, and demons alike. Each understood that this would not be a conventional war zone. The Alpha Legion did not confront their enemies with waves of berserk heretics or rampaging demons. They did not waste resources on open warfare. Their fortress would be a maze of deceptions, traps, and manipulated perceptions. "Prepare for immediate breach," Malum ordered over the Vox. "Trust your training, trust your armor, trust your brothers, trust nothing else." "By your word, Brother Sergeant," they replied in unison. The Thunderhawk impacted the designated entry vector with a controlled lurch. Mag clamps gripped the external docking ring with brutal finality as breaching charges detonated in synchronized bursts. A tunnel of burning air hissed around the ramp as the forward assault doors slammed open. Malum was first through the breach. The interior of the fortress was wrong. Even the air tasted unnatural, filtered through thousands of layers of artificial life support, recycled endlessly until it no longer resembled breathable oxygen. The lighting pulsed at irregular intervals, casting long, shifting shadows across the steel corridors. Walls curved in strange, non-Euclidean angles, designed to disorient even the most disciplined warriors. This was not the careless decay of a corrupted hive. This was designed. Stern Guard Caedo, primary breach successful, Malum voxed to the fleet above. No immediate resistance. Proceeding with insertion. Acknowledged, Captain Jorkin responded. Remember, the Hydra strikes from the shadows. Expect the unseen. Malum advanced with his squad, sweeping sector by sector. The fortress was eerily silent. No alarm klaxons, no enemy patrols, no automated defenses engaging them. Only the faint hum of reactor cores and the distant sound of ventilation systems breathing like a slumbering predator. And yet the sense of being watched was constant. After 20 minutes of steady advance, they reached their first point of contact, an intersection marked by a massive data core chamber. Malum halted, analyzing the chamber's contents. Banks of cogitator arrays hummed with activity. Data scribes, heavily augmented cultists with blank eyes and metal-studded flesh, worked silently at the controls. Dozens of them. None turned to face the Ultramarines. None reached for weapons. They simply continued working, as though oblivious to the intrusion. "Targets identified," one Stern Guard brother voxed. Malum raised his fist, halting further advance. "Hold," he observed. There was something deeply unnatural here. The cultists were not ignoring them out of fear or submission. They were part of the deception. No attempt at resistance. No alarms. A perfect invitation to strike. "Trap," Malum concluded. His internal auspex flickered. Energy readings shifted. The walls themselves pulsed. Suddenly, one of the cultists turned its head with a jarring, inhuman motion. Its mouth split open unnaturally wide, revealing rows of mechanized teeth as a distorted voice rasped through a hidden Vox speaker. "Welcome, Ultramarines," it hissed. "You have arrived precisely where we desired." The room distorted. The cogitator banks shimmered. The cultists dissolved like smoke. Holographic projectors disengaged, revealing not a data core, but a kill chamber. Heavy bulkheads slammed shut behind the squad. Dozens of ceiling-mounted turrets emerged from concealed compartments, already spitting streams of plasma and bolt fire. Malum reacted instantly. "Defense pattern Epsilon. Countermeasures active." Storm shields locked into place as his brothers advanced under heavy fire, returning bolter volleys toward the turrets. Explosive rounds shredded several of the automated defenses as the squad pushed forward, undeterred. A sudden secondary trap triggered. A null field pulse erupted from the floor, briefly scrambling their targeting sensors and Vox links. Reality itself seemed to bend for an instant, voices whispering in every direction at once. Malum's voice cut through the interference. "Stay on me. Focus." Despite the blinding flashes, they advanced in perfect formation. The Alpha Legion relied on confusion, but confusion found no home in Ultramarines. They reached the far end of the chamber, just as the final turrets detonated in a shower of debris. The exit bulkhead was manually sealed, a crude physical barrier. Malum planted a melta charge without pause, vaporizing the lock in a single blast. The doors slid open to reveal a narrow, descending stairwell, downward, always downward. The deeper they pressed into the fortress, the more the environment twisted. The walls were engraved with spiraling runes that threatened to draw the eye endlessly inward. Vox static grew heavier. Auspex readings returned impossible geometry, rooms mapped in ways that defied physical space. Multiple times they encountered branching corridors that led them back to their point of origin, despite clear forward progress. A labyrinth of warp space manipulation. Localized warp folding, one brother voxed. Impossible architecture. Malum responded with calculated certainty. Impossible for men, but not for the Hydra. The Alpha Legion had weaponized their own fortress. It was not simply a structure. It was a living snare, a spatial maze designed to trap invaders indefinitely while disorienting even the most disciplined minds. But Malum Caedo did not falter. He adapted. Activating his helm's sacred memory algorithms, Malum began overlaying manual markers onto the squad's internal mapping grid. Physical markers were burned into the walls at each turn, a proven anti-illusion tactic. The labyrinth could warp pathways, but it could not alter the physical marks quickly enough. "Anchor points logged," Malum voxed. "We make our own map." One step at a time, they forced the maze to reveal its structure. Finally, after hours within the fortress, they reached what could only be the central sanctum. The doors before them were towering, carved with the many-headed Hydra motif, the symbol of the Alpha Legion. Malum's auspex flared. Life signs detected. "Stand ready," he ordered. The doors hissed open. Inside, the command chamber pulsed with shifting blue light. Hololithic displays projected Imperial fleet deployments, planetary defense protocols, and data streams from distant sectors. Every screen showed Imperial secrets, stolen and dissected. Somehow, the Alpha Legion had acquired intelligence from far beyond the Cauldrous reach. Standing at the center of it all was a figure in dark green power armor, trimmed with silver, the Alpha Legion warlord himself. His helm bore the stylized Hydra crest. His weapon, a twin-bladed power glaive, hummed softly as he turned to face them. "Malum Caedo," the traitor greeted, his voice calm, almost amused. "We've been expecting you." Malum raised his bolter without hesitation. "Then you knew you would die today." The Hydra's trap had been set, but the blade had arrived, and the reckoning was about to begin. The command sanctum pulsed with unnatural light. Banks of cogitators and data spires thrummed beneath a soft azure glow, casting flickering shadows across the walls where the many-headed Hydra emblem coiled like a living serpent. Holoscreens displayed sector maps, Imperial fleet movements, and corrupted astropathic streams. The scale of the Alpha Legion's infiltration became instantly clear. This was not merely a war zone. This was an information engine, a machine of subversion and manipulation that reached far beyond Cauldrous. The Hydra's warlord stood calmly in its center. Unlike the berserk fury of Vorax or the sorcerous arrogance of Samael, this traitor radiated something far colder. A predator who had waited in the dark, watching, calculating. His armor gleamed, green polished to near-reflective sheen, silver trim immaculate. His helm, marked with twin Hydra crests, revealed nothing of his face behind its featureless visor. In his hands he held a power glaive of Xenos craftsmanship, its twin crescent blades humming softly with energy. "You made better time than we anticipated," the warlord said smoothly, his voice amplified through vox grills that distorted his tone, masking its true origin. Malum Caedo advanced steadily, his bolter raised, brothers fanning out beside him in a disciplined arc. "Surrender is not offered," Malum stated flatly. The warlord chuckled softly. "Of course not. That's not your way. Nor mine." He gestured lazily toward the walls of data screens. "But you should know, Malum Caedo, your presence here was always accounted for. Graia, Arcona, all necessary diversions. The Hydra thrives upon the predictable. Every victory you claim feeds our design." "Your design ends here," Malum replied. "Does it?" the traitor asked, tilting his helm. "Or do you simply sever one neck while others grow?" Malum fired. The bolter round screamed across the chamber, but before impact the warlord flickered and dissolved. A hologram. The real enemy was elsewhere. "Contact," one of Malum's brothers voxed sharply. From concealed alcoves above, the Hydra's true defenders emerged. Alpha Legion astartes in full battle plate descended on grav chutes, their emerald armor catching the blue light as they landed silently around the Ultramarines. Their bolters were raised before their boots touched the ground. "Ambush vector confirmed," Malum growled. "Engage!" The room erupted into violence. Bolter fire cracked in disciplined bursts as both sides exchanged withering volleys. Malum pivoted left, his rounds tearing into one enemy who moved just a second too slow. The traitor's pauldron detonated, his arm severed clean as he fell backward into a cascade of shattered glass from a nearby display. Another Alpha Legionnaire advanced from the right. Malum recognized the faint shimmer of a cloaking field, collapsing as the traitor fired. The Ultramarine dropped his stance, the bolt round screaming harmlessly past his helm, and answered with two controlled bursts that detonated the enemy's chest plate, sending him crumpling. Around him, his brothers fought with absolute discipline. Stern Guard Brother Harrian neutralized two more with pinpoint headshots, his vengeance rounds detonating the heretics before they could close distance. Brother Cassian's heavy bolter barked a constant stream of fire, saturating the upper balconies and forcing hidden snipers into cover. Yet for every traitor they dropped, more emerged. The Alpha Legion had filled this chamber with dozens of their best, true astartes, not cultists or corrupted rabble. Their formations were fluid, shifting with practiced precision. Each Ultramarine was met by a counterpart trained in their own doctrine. The Hydra fought as reflections of the Codex itself. "They study us," Malum thought grimly. "They fight us as ourselves." But that was their weakness. The Codex Astartes was more than strategy. It was adaptability. And Malum Caedo was its master. "Execute pattern Delta Red," he voxed sharply. Without hesitation, his squad shifted formation, suddenly contracting into overlapping fire arcs, forcing the Alpha Legionnaires into tighter lines where their superior numbers became a hindrance. The Ultramarines' bolter fire became surgical, coordinated, relentless. The traitors faltered. The discipline of the Sons of Ultramar could not be mimicked indefinitely. The last of the Alpha Legion strike squad fell beneath Malum's chainsword, its teeth grinding through armor and bone with a shriek that echoed across the chamber. The room fell into sudden silence. Only the hiss of sparking control panels and the dripping of severed coolant lines filled the void. "Clear," Brother Harrian voxed. Malum surveyed the battlefield, but the Hydra's true master was still absent. And then the voice returned. From everywhere at once. Impressive, predictable, yet impressive. The chamber shifted, Panels along the far wall slid open, revealing a hidden corridor. From its shadows stepped the true warlord, no longer a hologram. His glaive spun slowly in his hands as he approached. "Do you see now, Malum Caedo? Every strike, every victory, every death has been a move we anticipated. You have served your purpose." Malum advanced, unshaken. "I have served only the Emperor." The warlord lunged. The duel was unlike any Malum had faced before. The Alpha Legionnaire was fast, far faster than his bulk suggested. The twin blades of the power glaive sang through the air, arcs of green energy sparking as they clashed against Malum's chainsword. Sparks burst in bright showers as they circled one another, weapons colliding in rapid exchanges. The Hydra's style was precise, surgical, like a reflection of Malum's own. Calculated footwork, exploiting every minor opening, striking to disable, not waste motion. Twice the glaive slipped dangerously close, once cutting deep into Malum's vambrace, once scoring across his breastplate. Warning runes flashed red across his HUD, but Malum adapted. He pressed inside the reach of the longer weapon, forcing the warlord to switch to close-grip defense. The chainsword's teeth bit into the haft of the glaive, grinding as the two locked weapons. For a moment they stood nose to nose, servos screaming. "You cannot kill an idea," the warlord hissed. "No," Malum agreed, "but I can kill you." With a sudden surge of strength, Malum twisted, snapping the glaive's haft. The twin blades clattered to the floor. The warlord stumbled, momentarily exposed. Malum's bolter fired point blank. The explosive round detonated within the traitor's chest cavity, blowing him backward. He struck the far wall with a sickening impact, leaving a streak of black ichor across the metal as he slumped. Malum advanced. Even now, the Hydra tried to rise. Malum's chainsword revved to life once more. "The Hydra grows back," the warlord rasped weakly. Malum stood over him. "Not today." The chainsword fell. The warlord's head was severed clean, his body collapsing in a final, broken spasm. The chamber was still. The heart of the Hydra's operation lay shattered. With the command node destroyed, the fortress's remaining defenders scattered like insects. The encrypted networks that had fed intelligence to dozens of other Alpha Legion cells now went dark. Caldrus was severed. The blade had struck true. Hours later, Malum stood aboard the Glory of Macraga once more, watching as the Hydra's fortress burned in controlled demolition fires from orbit. Explosions rippled across its surface as plasma torpedoes cleansed its tainted hull. Inquisitor Cybel's voice crackled over the command channel. "One more head removed, Stern Guard Caedo. The others will remember," Malum answered quietly. "Let them." The war would go on, but for this day the Hydra lay still,